morning. Welcome to the Public Service Commission's hearing regarding docket number 2019-227E pertaining to Lockhart Power Company's Integrated Resource Plan. We'll start off by taking a roll call of commissioners. District 1.
Commissioner Williams is present in the hearing room.
District 3.
Caston present in the hearing room.
District 4.
Irvin present virtually.
District 5.
Thomas is present in the hearing room.
District 7.
Powers is present in the hearing room.
I would note that Chairman Williams from District 6 is on military leave, and I'm Florence Belser from District 2. Let's take appearances from the parties, please. Who's appearing for Lockhart Power Company?
Madam Chair, my name is John Bowen, and appearing with me is Peg Fox as far as attorneys, and Brian Stone is here as our witness.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen. Who's appearing for the Office of Regulatory Staff?
Madam Chair, this is Jeff Nelson along with Andrew Bateman. I seem to be having a little issue with my video right now, which we're trying to fix.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. And now I will ask Staff Counsel Jerisha Dukes to read the docket, please.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and good morning. Madam Vice Chair and Commissioners, this proceeding before the Public Service Commission in docket number 2019-227-E concerns the 2020 Integrated Resource Plan of Lockhart Power Company in compliance with South Carolina Code Section 58-37-40A1. Please take notice that this is a virtual hearing in this matter that has been scheduled for today, beginning at 10 a.m. This is a virtual hearing due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I am advised by our IT staff that all technical facilities and platforms are working. Madam Vice Chair and Commissioners, the docket is in order.
Thank you, Ms. Dukes. Are there any preliminary matters that need to be addressed before we begin?
Madam Chair, this is Jeff Nelson for the Office of Regulatory Staff. I would like to request that Mr. Phil Hayett be allowed to adopt the pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. Sam Rybeck. He is no longer employed by J. Kennedy & Associates. Mr. Hayett will be able to answer any questions regarding that testimony, either from the company or from the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Mr. Bowen, do you wish to be heard?
No objection.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen. Do either of the parties wish to present an opening statement?
We do, Madam Chair.
Please proceed.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, Lockhart Power Company, we represent Lockhart Power Company. Lockhart Power Company, some of you know, some of you may not be quite as familiar with it, because I think this is the first time that Lockhart Power has come before the Commission in some time. Lockhart Power is a very small company. It started in 1912. It provides power up in a small area around Lockhart, South Carolina. While there have been some changes in the number of customers, by and large, it has not changed over the last 15 or more years, and the current number of customers is about 6,100. From the beginning, Lockhart Power had one small hydro plant, and for the last 75 years has purchased the bulk of its power from Duke Power Company to, in turn, provide power to its customers. Today, we're here to talk to the Commission about an integrated resource plan. The legislature passed the first IRP, Integrated Resource Plan, back in 1992. The Public Service Commission, and I'm saying this, I think most know this, held a generic proceeding about the resource plans that the legislature passed, and the PSC issued an order as to Lockhart Power in 1993, basically stating that Lockhart Power was unique, and a copy of that order, matter of fact, is attached to the ORS witness Scotternato's testimony. The legislature then made tweaks to that law approximately a year ago, and our witness will talk about what go into the IRP a little bit more in detail. Lockhart Power filed its proposed plan before you with the Public Service Commission in June of this year. Thereafter, ORS hired a consultant to assist it with its plan, and they came back with 10 recommendations. In the process, Lockhart Power has responded to 4 different sets of requests for production of documents beginning in June of this year. Those 4 sets of requests amounted to about 122 separate requests for documents, and they're contained in about a 3 to a 4 inch thick notebook. And those all responded to the 13-page IRP that Lockhart filed. As far as the consultant's recommendations to the commission with respect to Lockhart's plan, they came back with 10 recommendations. There were 5 what we call near-term, or they called near-term, and 5 long-term recommendations for a total of 10. Of those 10 recommendations, 7 have been resolved, and you will hear testimony as to all of that. As to the 3 remaining issues that need to be unresolved, you will hear details about that as well. The remaining issues are primarily a result of a small company, Lockhart Power, trying very hard to comply with a statute that was drafted with the much larger utilities in mind. I think, as you will hear, Lockhart believes it's complied with the statute as it applies to Lockhart's unique circumstances. And ultimately, we're asking the commission to approve Lockhart's IRP because we feel it represents the most reasonable and prudent means of Lockhart being able to meet its energy and capacity needs. That completes my opening statement. I don't know if ORS has one, and if they don't, then we'll continue on, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen. Mr. Nelson, do you wish to be heard at this time?
Very briefly, Madam Chair. We don't disagree that Lockhart is unique. Unlike the other investor-owned utilities in the state, they're much smaller. However, we do believe that Lockhart is not exempt from having to comply with the IRP statute, which was passed under Act 62. Therefore, we conducted an analysis and review the same as we've done with the other investor-owned utilities. It seems like a lot for a company this size, but we don't, because there's no specific exemption for Lockhart. Lockhart is exempt from the renewable energy provisions under Act 62, under Title 58, Chapter 41. So based on the statutory requirements, we conducted our review and analysis, and through our witnesses today, we'll present our report and additional testimony. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Mr. Bowen, you want to proceed with your case, please?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Stone, would you please state your name, business address?
Wait a minute. We need to get him sworn in.
Oh, you need
if you just call him to the stand, please.
Yeah, go ahead. Mr. Stone, will you please come to the stand?
Yes.
He's present.
Hey, Mr. Stone, may I ask you to state your name for the record, please?
My name is Brian D. Stone.
All right, and I'm going to ask the court reporter to swear you in, please.
Mr. Stone, if you would raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. You may proceed, Mr. Bowen.
Okay. Mr. Stone, would you please give your business address and what your position is with Lockhart Power?
My business address is Lockhart Power Company, Post Office Box 10, 420 River Street, Lockhart, South Carolina, 29364. I'm president of Lockhart Power Company, or the company. In this role, I have responsibility for the company's overall performance and management.
As far as the IRP that was filed with the commission on June the 17th of this year, was it prepared by you or under your supervision?
Yes,
Is the IRP truly correct to the best of your knowledge?
yes,
Did you prepare or have prepared under your supervision a revised attachment 1 to the IRP
yes.
on July the 20th? Yeah. Madam Chair, we'd like to go ahead and move into the record the IRP that was filed on June the 17th, along with the attachment 1, revised attachment 1 that was filed on July the 20th.
We will mark the IRP filed June 17th and the revised attachment 1 filed July 20th as a composite exhibit, and that will be marked as hearing exhibit number 1, marked for identification, and then entered into the record of this case. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Stone, did you have cause to be filed direct testimony of some 12 pages? And if I were to ask you those questions today, would your responses be the same?
Yes,
Did you also have cause to file some rebuttal testimony of some 13 pages long? And if I were to ask you those same questions today, would your responses be the same?
yes,
And as far as your exhibit BDS 1, which is some 6 pages long, were those exhibits prepared by you or under your supervision?
yes.
Madam Chair, we'd like to go ahead and have his direct testimony, his rebuttal testimony, and his exhibit placed in the record.
Let's see. Mr. Stone's direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand. Mr. Stone's rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as though given orally from the stand. And Mr. Stone's exhibit attached to his rebuttal testimony, I believe it's exhibit BSD 1 through BSD 3, or is it just one with, anyway. His exhibits will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 2 and entered into the record of the case. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stone, what is the standard for approving an integrated resource plan?
The commission shall approve Lockhart's IRP if the commission determines that the proposed IRP represents the most reasonable and prudent means of meeting Lockhart's energy and capacity needs as of the time the plan is reviewed.
Did the standard change with the enactment of the South Carolina Energy Freedom Act last year?
No, the South Carolina Energy Freedom Act, or Act 62, sets forth specific requirements for IRPs that are very similar to the requirements that applied prior to its enactment. Lockhart has been filing IRPs that meet the commission's requirements for many years. The main difference is that I believe Act 62 was intended to encourage and promote the adoption of renewable energy by investor-owned utilities, particularly those utilities with modest adoption rates of renewables. Act 62's IRP requirements are designed to reflect that. Because Lockhart's generation is already 100% renewable, I believe we have met the legislative intent of the changes to the IRP process contained in Act 62.
Do you have a summary of your pre-filed and rebuttal testimony, and if so, would you please present it to the commission?
Yes. First, I will provide a general description of Lockhart Power Company, including several key characteristics that make it unique among South Carolina's investor-owned utilities. In order to properly evaluate Lockhart's Integrated Resource Plan, or IRP, an understanding of these key characteristics is necessary. With this backdrop, I will describe how Lockhart's IRP meets the statutory requirements for the necessary components of the IRP. Finally, I will address the specific IRP factors the Commission is directed by statute to consider and how Lockhart's IRP appropriately balances those factors. In my rebuttal testimony, I addressed the 5 ORS near-term recommendations individually, followed by the 5 ORS long-term recommendations as a group. In this summary, since this is my first appearance before many of you, I would like to take the opportunity to quickly introduce Lockhart Power Company to you, including several of the aforementioned key characteristics and how they have major implications for our IRP filing. Then I will summarize the portions of my direct and rebuttal testimony related to certain recommendations made by the ORS consultant. Lockhart Power Company is in many respects a traditional investor-owned electric utility. For example, it's vertically integrated with generation, sub-transmission, and distribution assets. It has retail operations that are regulated by this state commission, including an assigned service area in which it serves industrial, commercial, and residential customers. Lockhart Power also buys and sells power on the wholesale market, and therefore parts of its business are regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. However, it is Lockhart Power's key differences from traditional investor-owned utilities that I want to focus on in order to properly frame the remaining issues between the company and ORS. There are three such key differences relevant to this IRP proceeding. First, the company size. Lockhart Power is believed to be one of the smaller electric investor-owned utilities in the country. It has approximately 6,160 customers, 54 employees, and its peak load is normally between 70 to 80 megawatts. By comparison, its peer South Carolina investor-owned utilities are of the order of magnitude of 100 times the size of Lockhart Power, if not larger. Second, renewable energy. Lockhart Power has an unmatched renewable energy profile, with 100% of the power it generates coming from renewable resources. And third, the Full Requirements Power Purchase Agreement, or PPA. Although Lockhart Power derives 100% of the power it generates from renewable resources, it does not generate enough power to serve its entire load. The company purchases the balance of its power needs under a long-term PPA with Duke Energy Carolina and has done so for decades. These three key differences, company size, renewable energy profile, and the PPA, have tremendous implications for our IRP process. I'll focus on summarizing my testimony in the main areas where there are remaining issues with the ORS consultants. The primary area where the company and ORS's consultant disagree is with respect to resource portfolios. Lockhart Power's IRP has just a single base case, and there are a number of good reasons for that. Since the Duke PPA ensures that Lockhart Power's load will be continuously balanced under all load scenarios, the company does not have to add generation to serve any future load additions. Also, the company does not have aged fossil or other generation resources that will require replacement. Finally, unlike other investor-owned utilities, there is no need to move toward a higher adoption rate of renewable resources over time, since Lockhart Power already derives 100% of the generated energy from renewables. While other utilities may consider various resource portfolios with lower or higher levels of carbon tax, solar, wind, or modular nuclear penetration, or earliest practical coal plant retirements, none of these concepts applies to the company. Even if they did apply, the company has a very limited ability under the Duke PPA to add generation resources. Having said this, Lockhart Power continues to follow generation resource technology and related price trends with the goal of identifying specific generation projects that will cost-effectively serve its customers. Currently, the company has no such projects in its IRP. If and when such projects are identified, the subsequent IRP will be updated accordingly. To summarize this point, the company does not believe that it should arbitrarily create a resource portfolio just to check a box that does not make sense for a company in Lockhart Power's unique situation. Hopefully, this helps give a sense of the challenges that have already been associated with applying an IRP process designed for traditional investor-owned utilities to the unique situation of Lockhart Power. In fact, going back almost 30 years to the 1993 Lockhart Power IRP docket, the Commission stated that, quote, essentially, Lockhart has unique problems, end quote, and that they, quote, presented a unique situation for the development of an IRP, end quote. Likewise, the ORS's consultant states in Exhibit AMS-1 that, quote, "It is clear that due to the nature of the company's system, some of the requirements of Section 40 are difficult to apply to Lockhart Power Company's system," end quote. These same challenges are at the heart of the matter before this commission today. At this point, I would like to focus specifically on the recommendations in the testimony of the ORS's consultant. There were 5 near-term and 5 longer-term recommendations. The ORS has indicated that it believes the company has provided sufficient information to address 2 of the near-term and all 5 of the longer-term recommendations. I would therefore like to summarize my testimony related to the 3 remaining near-term recommendations that ORS indicates have not been resolved. The near-term recommendation number 3 is that, quote, "The company should develop several resource portfolios, low, medium, and high, to evaluate the range of demand side, supply side, storage, and other technologies available to meet its load requirements." As stated above, there are a number of reasons the company did not provide alternative scenarios to its current situation from the demand side and supply side perspectives. From the perspective of evaluating storage and other technologies, the company's small size effectively precludes it from being on the bleeding or even often the cutting edge of technology. The associated costs and risks would disproportionately impact the company and its customers. The company tends to be, appropriately, a technology follower, not leader. Based on the company's current understanding of battery storage technology and cost, there is not yet enough visibility looking forward to clearly identify a need or place for it in the resource portfolio, assuming the company continues to have a full requirements PPA. Of course, the company will continue to follow this and other technologies over time and update the IRP as appropriate if and when the situation changes. The near-term recommendation number 5 is that, quote, "The company should include an evaluation of low, medium, and high fuel prices and environmental regulations, primarily CO2 costs, in order to evaluate its Duke Energy Carolina's PPA costs," end quote. One of the primary reasons for the company's early decision to intensely focus on expanding its renewable generation resources was to absolutely minimize fuel price and environmental regulatory risk. The company has essentially no fuel price or environmental regulatory risk associated with its resources. It operates these resources to their maximum extent to maximize the amount of low-risk renewable energy generated. There are no operating levels to consider, as there may be for coal and natural gas, for example. While there is some amount of such risk associated with power purchased under the Duke PPA, that risk is periodically considered by this commission as a function of the Duke IRP process. We have participated in Duke's IRP stakeholder process to ensure we understand these risks at a high level. From our perspective, since we cannot control Duke's resource portfolio, evaluating that risk is a binary decision on our part. If we are not willing to accept the associated risk, we can choose not to enter or renew the PPA at the end of the term. Lastly, near-term recommendation number 6 is that, quote, "The company should develop a method of conducting resource evaluations as part of its IRP to compare its proposed plan to other reasonable options under different load, fuel, and risk sensitivities. This is necessary in order to compare net benefits of different resource plans," end quote. This recommendation was evidently made with the assumption that additional resource plans would be proposed. For the reasons just stated, we do not have different resource plans proposed, so we have not included a method to evaluate different resource plans in this IRP. Again, it does not make sense for the company to arbitrarily create alternative resource portfolios simply to check a box. If and when different resource evaluations are required as part of the IRP, the company will develop a comparison method at that time. As far as the 5 long-term recommendations made by ORS, Without weighing in on the appropriateness of the recommendations at this time, the company has agreed to consider those recommendations no later than the next comprehensive IRP. We ask that the Commission take no action on these long-term recommendations at this time. In conclusion, the Commission now faces the same challenge as it has faced dating back to at least 1993, how to fit the square peg of Lockhart Power into the round hole of current regulations. In my rebuttal testimony, I stated that the company is willing to modify its earlier filed IRP to include certain clarifications that would resolve a number of the issues raised by the ORS's consultant. As stated in Section 58-37-40C2, the Commission has the discretion to balance a number of factors and should exercise common sense in evaluating Lockhart's IRP. We believe that, based on the information provided, the Commission will agree that the company's IRP as amended meets the statutory requirements as they apply to the company's unique situation, and that it appropriately balances the various factors the IRP must consider. We ask that the Commission determine that Lockhart's IRP represents the most reasonable and prudent means of meeting its energy and capacity needs, and approve Lockhart's IRP as amended.
Does that conclude your summary?
Yes, and thank you to the Commissioners for their attention.
Okay. Would you please turn to Mr. Hyatt's, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, sir rebuttal testimony, and I would ask the Commissioners as well to turn to Mr. Hyatt's sir rebuttal testimony at page 5. There's a chart on page 5 that I think is helpful, and there's also a chart on page 6 that would be helpful to the Commissioners and all present to turn to at this time.
Yes.
Okay, let's wait a minute and give them an opportunity to do that. Does anybody need any more time to turn to that page?
Mr. Bowen, I think we're ready.
Okay. Turning to page 5 of that sir rebuttal testimony, does that page indicate 5? It's numbered 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6, but those are the 5 so-called near-term recommendations by ORS. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And as to that, looking at the right-hand column under status, does it indicate there that on the item number 1 and item number 4 that those two have been resolved, as you have mentioned?
Yes, items 1 and 4 are marked as resolved.
Okay. As far as the other 3 items, I'm talking about 3, 5, and 6, are still unresolved. Is that correct?
Yes, that is the status on this table.
Okay. Please summarize your position with respect to those.
The company believes it has reasonably met the requirement to develop several
This is
resources.
as to item number 3, correct?
As far as item number 3, the company believes it has reasonably met the requirement. The low, medium, and high, in this case, relates to the adoption of renewable energy. Lockhart's existing generation portfolio produces 100% renewable energy, which represents a very high case for the adoption of renewable energy. In other words, Lockhart has already met the intent of the statute to encourage adoption of renewables. It does not make sense for Lockhart to propose low and medium cases, which essentially would be moving backwards. As far as evaluating demand-side programs and storage and other technologies, my testimony fully discusses the extent to which Lockhart has evaluated those options and explains why they were not included in the IRP at this time.
Okay, let's move now to recommendation number 5. Please summarize the company's position on including an evaluation of low, medium, and high fuel prices and environmental regulations in order to evaluate its Duke PPA costs.
In this case, the company's 100% renewable energy resources already demonstrate a best case as it relates to fuel prices and costs. environmental regulations, and other uncertainties or risks as they relate to the company. ORS's recommendation that Lockhart evaluate these costs and risks, quote, in order to evaluate its Duke Energy Carolina's PPA costs, end quote, is not required by the statute. In fact, this amounts to a suggestion that the company should independently evaluate Duke's fuel costs and environmental risks. That is the purpose of Duke's IRP proceeding, and the company has participated as a stakeholder in that proceeding.
As far as that recommendation number 5, I asked you in the question about fuel prices, and you replied fuel costs. Is it true that while the recommendation talks about fuel prices, the actual statute talks about fuel costs?
Yes.
Okay. As far as recommendation number 6, please summarize the company's position on developing a method of conducting resource evaluations to compare its proposed plan to other reasonable options under different load, fuel, and risk sensitivities.
Again, the company is already at 100% renewable energy resources. We do not know of any, quote, reasonable options, end quote. That would make sense as far as a comparison to the proposed plan.
To summarize what you just said, if I understand your testimony correctly, you've got 2 basic ways of obtaining power to be able to sell to your customers. One being renewables, which you do generate, and that's all essentially you do generate is renewables, and that's one part of your portfolio to provide energy to your customers. The other one is through a Duke PPA, which is a purchase power adjustment. Is that correct?
Yes.
And as far as the Duke PPA is concerned, they have to provide you whatever power you require. Is that correct?
Yes, and sorry, one clarification, your
Okay.
question. The PPA is power purchase.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Sorry, but yes.
Okay. And as far as any forecasts that you have to provide as a result of the IRP statute, et cetera, whatever you need, you get from Duke. So in essence, is it true that if your forecast goes up 0.5% per year, or 1% per year, or 5% per year, Duke must provide you that power?
Madam Chair, I hate to interrupt this, but clearly this is extremely leading the witness, and this is Mr. Bowen's witness, and I would just ask that he stop leading the witness.
Okay. I will withdraw that question.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. Mr. Stone, with respect to how does any forecast that you have and how you have to provide that power, how does that relate to what Duke provides you?
We provide a forecast periodically. The forecast is mostly unrelated to it's completely unrelated to the requirements under the contract that Duke provides as much or as little power instantaneously and continuously as we need. So, for example, if we go through the Great Recession and some of our load drops off dramatically, the amount of power that we purchase from Duke would decline in a corresponding manner. If our power increases due to extreme weather events, the amount of power that we purchase would continue to flow from Duke in the corresponding manner. So from a forecasting perspective, this is one of those areas where we are much different than the traditional investor in utilities, because we are not responsible for balancing our own load. By contract, Duke performs that function for us. The entire forecasting effort is much less meaningful. Becomes almost we still go through the process, and we put a reasonable amount of time into that effort, but ultimately it's not actionable from our perspective.
As far as comparing Lockhart Power to larger utility companies, does Lockhart have the same type of generation facilities such as nuclear, coal, fuel oil, et cetera, plants that larger utilities have?
No, we do not. Due to our small size, our entire peak load is a small fraction of the output of one utility scale natural gas or coal or nuclear plant. So obviously, it doesn't make sense for us to try to take the same approach that traditional investor-owned utilities would take in those regards. And that's because we have not identified a way to provide our full requirements for ourselves in a cost-effective way for our customers. That is why for approximately 75 years or so, we've been engaged in a contract for full requirements power service with Duke. So it is a complete different situation. We have had one medium-sized hydroelectric plant since 1920. It's still online and running stronger than ever. And we have identified ways to, I would say, to innovatively add generation resources, renewable generation resources, in the last 14 years or so, in order to control our costs under the Duke PPA, and of course, in line with, I think what everybody wants is a higher adoption rate for renewable resources.
Okay, thank you very much. Madam Chair, that's all of our questions, and I think that completes the summary as well. So the witness is available for cross-examination.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen. Mr. Nelson, any questions?
ORS has no questions for Mr. Stone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Commissioners?
Madam Chairman.
Commissioner Powers?
Thank you. First, let me say I appreciate your testimony today, and I'm very impressed with the hydroelectric history that you have. And I realize you are small, and as far as comparison to others, but there's some thought that if you're driving a Fiat and you get a speeding ticket, it's the same as you're driving a tractor trailer and you get a speeding ticket. So, I mean, there are provisions that we have to go by. But one thing that I'm wondering about, these diesel facilities that you have for the emergency under the contract or with Duke, how often are these used, and when were they last used? It looks like from what I've been looking at, it's only been used maybe once in 2019 and maybe not even used 2 or 3 years before that.
I think that's right. They're emergency backup generators. They're used only in times of grid emergencies, a certain designation of grid emergencies. I'm sure we've run them for such an emergency within the last several years, but it's been a while. I don't remember exactly when that was. Typically, we operate those generators for 1 hour a month, and that's simply to make sure that they continue to operate and to be reliable so that if and when we do need them, they will operate on demand.
Okay, so there's no significant cost at all to have those or to maintain those?
No, sir. Well, there is some cost just for routine maintenance, but no, certainly not a significant cost.
Okay. And your demand forecast, even though I noticed you talk about 0.5% or 1% a year, over the period that you have as far as this 15-year plan, that's about a 15% increase. And from what I've read, it seems like you've only had there's been a lessening demand every year but one. What would you base this increase on? I grew up in what is now impoverished in a small area of the Marlboro County, and it's getting smaller and smaller, and demands are becoming less and less. And I know that your area has some of the same difficulties. What would you base this forecast on as far as any increase?
Sure, and I appreciate that question because it is somewhat unique to Lockhart Power as well. Unlike the traditional investor-owned utilities, our entire service area is very rural in nature. We do not serve large urban areas. And our service area is parts of 5 counties in the upstate that are rural in nature. So our residential and residential load at least is very static. Over an extended period of time, there's what I would describe as a very, very slow bleed of customers, and that's been a historic trend. Because of our size, where we have focused our economic development efforts, which have been relatively significant, we've focused on attracting new industrial customers, which in turn bring additional jobs. And on a community involvement, from a community involvement perspective, we've put a lot of effort and continue to put a lot of effort into housing and I'd say helping as a partner with a group of other community leaders to bring new housing to the area. The job situation is very strong in the heart of where our service area is. There are literally several thousand people a day that commute into our service area from other areas to work, and then they go back home. And so we're working with community leaders to be able to add, newer housing, which by and large doesn't exist in our area, so that those people don't have to make a long commute and they can actually live in our area, which would help the residential load. But to the point of your question, I mean, even a small industrial customer, if and when we attract them or as we attract them, because of our small load, is a very meaningful percentage of our load. So for example, if we had one customer that was 1 megawatt, for example, that had a 1 megawatt load, which is not a large industrial customer, that would be more than 1% of our peak load, since we're just 70 to 80 megawatts. And so if every other year, for example, we attracted one megawatt customer, that's a 0.5% annual rate. If every year we attract one megawatt customer, that's an annual 1% rate. And we have several industrial parks, but 2 in particular, 2 different parts of our service area that we are investing fairly heavily in order to be able to attract residential customers. We actually have I mentioned the smaller industrial customers. We have a lot of electrical infrastructure to be able to serve much larger industrial customers as well. And in fact, our newest industrial customer is expected to be hopefully at least 6 megawatts load or larger. And so if a 6 megawatt customer comes to a Duke or a Dominion, that they kind of get lost in the thousands of megawatts of load that those utilities have. In our case, it's a step up. It's a step increase. It's an abrupt increase in our total load. And you simply can't forecast those types of increases accurately. You don't know when your next industrial customer is going to move into your industrial park, and you don't know how much load they're going to have. So typically what we do is we forecast a very modest level of growth, and then when those customers come, then we include those in our IRP. It's noteworthy, one last piece, this also highlights one of the many areas of significant value that we get through our full requirements PPA. If we have a new 6 megawatt customer, for example, that may easily be 10% of our entire load, retail plus wholesale, that new customer, we can incorporate them into our load and serve them very quickly because we don't have to go and build additional utility scale generation projects, whether that's natural gas or any other source. Relatively speaking, if you think of what a traditional investor utility would have to do in order to accommodate an instantaneous 10% increase in their load, I mean, that would be literally maybe a couple thousand megawatts or 1,000 megawatts. And so it's another characteristic that's much different for us than it is for other utilities, that we can adopt or adapt that quickly to a new large load, and we have done that.
So also, I guess with industrial growth, there would be some sort of significant warning because they would have to build their facility and whatever business they're going into, you'd have enough time to, if you even had to renegotiate or something, you'd have plenty of time for that.
Right, that's yes. So if a new customer comes, industrial customer, typically they have, for example, it might be a 12-month to 18-month lead time under which they, from the time when they decide they're coming to the time when their facility is ready to place into operation. And that has been sufficient, if not ample time for us to build usually we build a substation immediately adjacent to where their facility is going and tie into our system. And that has been ample time for us to provide that service.
One other thing I was interested in is, as I say, having a rural background, some understanding of the population. Is there any demand or any programs that you have, even on a smaller scale, as far as energy efficiency or trying to encourage some sort of solar generation?
We do have a residential solar rate. One of the challenges that we have, again, as a small utility, is we're very conscientious of the cost impact on all of our customers of putting into effect any kind of rate that would have to be subsidized by our general customer base, because, again, our customers are rural. They tend to have, on average, modest means, and so we're very careful before we put into place any kind of rate that could negatively impact their costs. We look for win-win scenarios. And so in the case of the residential solar rate that we created a few years ago, and which was adopted by the commission, of course, that rate, we spent years discussing how to design that rate so as to not be cross-subsidized by, that term may not be in vogue. Perhaps a better term is to not have a revenue requirement impact on our other customers. And we developed a hybrid rate several years ago. I describe it as a hybrid rate, so that there's a monthly fixed cost. It's a minimum bill. So there's a monthly minimum bill, so that we're assured that each customer will pay at least their fair share of our fixed costs associated with our distribution system and to serve their home. And so that minimum bill is part of it, but it's still structured as a net metering rate. And so they do get above a certain amount, they get the full net metering benefits of avoiding paying our full retail rate for the power that they generate. And so it does, in fact, incentivize solar power, which of course is directly in line with our renewable goals and values as an organization.
Does Lockhart have any programs as far as going into residential areas, energy efficiency programs in the homes, or provided educational programs for your consumers?
We do have, there's a local radio station, and we have conservation advertising that promotes energy efficiency and conservation. The one challenge that we're dealing with in terms of the housing initiative I mentioned before is that the areas we serve, many of them are older mill villages. Union County is a county where we have a lot of investment and a lot of customer base. And Union County at one point was known as the textile capital of the world. And so as those textile mills shut down, as has occurred in many parts of the Southeast, but even more so in Union County, as those textile mills shut down, the mills and the homes where those people lived, those folks still live there for the most part. Those homes were often built well over 100 years ago, and they were built in mass for the workers at the mills. At the time, those homes were built, many of them without any insulation space. So traditional energy efficiency programs, like improving insulation, may not even apply. If you can't put insulation in the walls, then you can't, that presents some challenges. So we're again trying to work as part of a partnership throughout the community to identify ways to help improve energy efficiency. By and large, the value of energy efficiency to our system is relatively low. It's basically the energy value under which we buy power from Duke. And so we continue to look for energy programs that fit well. But under the Duke contract, any programs that we have are subject to approval by Duke, and so they need to make sense for Duke's system as well as our system, and that's been challenging. We've identified one demand-side management program that makes a lot of sense and provides value, a lot of value to some of our customers. But so far, we've been challenged to find other programs that apply. Again, the root reason for that is that we don't balance our own load, and so the Duke PPA has creates a different structure under which we get value for energy efficiency and demand-side management programs.
All right, thank you, Mr. Stone.
Thank you.
Any other commissioners? Commissioner Williams?
Thank you, Vice Chair Belzer. Mr. Stone, it is good to meet you under these circumstances and to learn about Lockhart Power. I appreciate the background and your testimony today. I want to follow up on one of Commissioner Powers' questions. If you were to show us your demand history, would that show a 1% increase? I'm wondering how you arrived at that 1% increase going forward, understanding what you just shared with Commissioner Powers, but what does the past tell you about that 1%?
So again, depending how far back you go, whether it's 10, 15, 20 years or more, and we tend to take a longer view because our service area is very static in terms of population. What you'll likely find is a series of step ups and step downs as opposed to smooth, gradual curves. And that goes into, if I coin a phrase, the law of small numbers. Because, again, as we've lost textile mills historically, we had one textile mill that I think right during or right after the Great Recession, we lost one industrial customer. That was 10% of our load. That actually drove a rate case at the time. That was one of the key factors we came in for one of our last two rate cases. So that's a big step up or step down, and for the most part, the residential commercial trends tend to get lost with those step up or step down. You, as I mentioned before, you simply can't predict when you're going to gain a new industrial customer or lose one. You certainly can't predict it more than a year or more out, and certainly not over a 15-year period. By and large, at this point, it's important to understand the history of our service area, and with the decline of the textile mills that happened up through as recently as 10 years ago, we used to have I think, a higher industrial load, and I think it has bottomed out. And over the last 10 to 15 years, 15 years anyway, we have gradually replaced that textile industrial load with industrial loads from other industries. And so we have a much more diverse industrial economy in our service area than we used to have. And based on that diversification, which is very healthy, obviously, certainly from a risk perspective to the communities, with that diversification and the continued interest that we see with our economic development efforts, the investments we're making into our industrial parks that we serve, and our marketing efforts to attract industrial customers, I would think that 1% should end up being low. It's just simply something that you can't forecast the lumpiness, that step up effect over time. The most recent, I think we've amended it, I believe, in my have not an attachment, but an amendment that has some different scenarios for load forecasts, and that included reflecting the most recent industrial customer we had that I mentioned before, which was, I think, approximately 6 megawatts. And as an example, that 1 6 megawatt load, that would be close to 10% of our peak load, and so that would be close to 10 years worth of 1% increases all in 1 year. So how do you forecast that? We don't have a better way. So what we've typically done is we've had a modest 1% annual increase, and then as we have identified additional customers coming, we'll update the forecast accordingly. I think the key point here is that regardless of, and I think this was brought out perhaps by the RS's consultant when we submitted the light load forecast and the high load forecast per their request. I think there were some questions that came out about whether or not the light was too light or the high was too high. What we were trying to do with those forecasts was to bracket the range of realistic, scenarios. And so the light was intentionally fairly low, and the high was intentionally fairly high, to show that the only thing that changes as a result of our actual load is basically it's one line item, which is how much power we buy from Duke. We still generate as much from the renewables as we possibly can. If our load goes up, we buy more. If our load goes down, we buy less. It's very straightforward. So there just simply isn't much, as far as we can tell, hardly any value in spending a lot of time and effort and money that our customers have to wind up covering in order to come up with a more, a detailed forecast down to the gnat's wing.
Thank you. Speaking of Duke, you mentioned that as a part of Duke's IRP stakeholder process, you all are at the table. Would you describe a little bit how significant that role is?
I'm sorry, the role of Duke?
Your role as a stakeholder in the IRP process for Duke.
Oh, I think our role is equivalent to any other stakeholder's role. We pay attention to their proceedings. I've participated in their virtual meetings that they've had. If we have questions or concerns, we can submit those to Duke, as would any other stakeholder. I think due to our long-term relationship with Duke, which we value and I believe they value, they have been very responsive to our concerns over a period of time.
I want to ask you some questions about your demand-side management and your pricing, which were quite impressive. And I was just curious, when you talk about the demand penalty, the 200 hours, billing demand rate, on and on, what's the impact of that on your customers' usage? Is that something that can be documented?
That's a great question. I really have no idea how to go back to when most of those measures and rate mechanisms were placed into effect. They date back, I mean, before me. I've been here 14 years, I think, which makes me one of the longer tenured heads of the IOU. And they primarily predated me. So they're so interwoven into our rate structure, I just don't know how to separate those out. One of the things we've committed to, in which I think the ORS is, consultant in the ORS have plan to accept, is that as we propose, additional such measures or programs in the future, that we would, try to identify a measure by which to track those. So we would do that going forward, certainly, to the extent possible.
I have two more questions. Has the company looked at the impact of kind of the changing climate in terms of flooding or drought on your hydroelectric capability and the impact of it?
Sure. So climate change, of course, is top of mind for I think everyone in our industry and beyond. We actually, related to the hydros, it's interesting you mentioned this. We're the only utility in the state, if not well beyond the state, that's developed greenfield hydroelectric facilities in the last, South Carolina, it's been at least 35 years. So, and we developed two at the same time. Both of those went into service in 2013, and one of those two is near our 100-plus-year-old Lockhart hydro plant. And I remember from design, the door, it's a very small footprint building. It vertically goes high up and down, but the footprint is very small. And the door to enter the building is at the top. It's at grade, and the door actually, it looks like, I believe it is essentially a submarine door. It has the handles, the round handles you can turn and lock. And the reason for that is it was designed so in the case of I think it was a 500-year flood event, but a very rare flood event, water would not penetrate into the building and submerge the generator and equipment in that building. So the two plants that were recently designed were obviously designed to current standards, and then all of our hydroelectric plants, there's a somewhat unusual element of those. It's one area where the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, has specific jurisdiction. So all of our hydro plants are licensed under the FERC licensing process, and that there's a whole division at FERC, and all they do is regulate and monitor hydroelectric plants across the country because of the obvious, if you think of the Hoover Dam, think of the obvious serious impacts there could be on customers if there is a failure of a dam or some of that infrastructure. So it's highly regulated at a federal level, and we go through that process and comply with all those requirements. On the hydro side, I think that addresses that question. Was there another part to the question I missed?
There will be, but the two plants that you're talking about, is that the Lockhart Bioenergy from 2015? Is that, you mentioned Greenfield Hydroelectric, and I'm just trying to convert and learn.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I said, and I know it's hard to communicate over the technology. I said Greenfield.
Mm-hmm.
So what I mean was we built two small hydroelectric plants from scratch, basically, at existing impoundments. One of those on our list of resources, if you're looking at that, is the Lockhart Minimum Flow Hydroelectric.
Okay.
And the other is the Upper Packlet Hydroelectric. So those are the two that were placed in service in 2013. In addition to those two hydro plants, we also have the Lower Packlet Hydro, which is a small plant that's much older, and the Lockhart hydroelectric plant. And all four of those hydroelectric plants are in our rate base. And then there's a fifth hydroelectric plant that we took over operational responsibility for in early summer of this year, and that's probably called Buzzard's Roost, or the Greenwood hydroelectric plant. And those are the five plants. That one is not a rate base. We've not been in for a rate case for 7 years, and so the Buzzard's Roost hydroelectric plant, and then the Lockhart Bioenergy project, which was built 5 years ago, were both of those have come under our control, or we built them since the last rate case, and therefore they're not in our rate base and they don't serve our customers.
The other half of my climate-related question had to do with drought and the impact of drought on hydroelectric planning.
Sure. So when it rains less, we generate more from our hydro, because our hydroelectric plants are primarily run-of-river. So if there's less water coming down the river, then we generate less power. The last time we went through a period like that was, going from memory, I think it was in the 2007, 2008 timeframe. I think we had a couple of years in a row where it was very hot, very, very hot summers, and not a lot of rain. And I mean, essentially, we just make less power. The plants are designed to, the larger plants at least, have multiple generating units and multiple turbines. So if there's less water, we just turn some of the turbines off, and we may run one unit instead of 2, 3, 4, or 5. So that from a hydro perspective, the impact on our customers is, if we generate less power from our renewable resources, then we have to make up, for generating less power by buying more from Duke. And conversely, if we generate more power, like recently it's been very wet, we've had a great year for renewable energy generation from hydro, and so we would buy less power from Duke. And the way our rates are structured, the cost of purchasing power from Duke, we flow that through to our customers on a dollar-for-dollar basis. We have a clause mechanism, I believe it's called Schedule O, that's approved by the Commission, by which we do that. And so Lockhart Power doesn't make money or lose money on that. The customers pay actual costs of purchasing power.
And again, piggybacking on Commissioner Power's question, and this is my last one, do you have a sense of how many of your customers generate power through solar, through rooftop solar or solar of any kind, and what kind of impact does that have on your total needs?
Yeah, the last time I asked was a few weeks ago, and it's between 10 and 15. So there's, there hasn't been a lot of interest in
Okay.
adopting that in our customer base.
So you're 10 to 15 customers?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate your patience and all your answers.
Thank you.
Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. Mr. Stone, appreciate you helping us understand the company. I occasionally drive Highway 49, primarily just trying to avoid traffic out on 85 and the construction out there. And coming in to Lockhart, you cross the river and you cross the canal. And there's been construction going on there for a while. I guess they replaced the bridge, I'm not sure. And just wondering, is that construction still ongoing, or is that kind of wrapped up at this point, the road construction?
I'm not sure I've had a request for a traffic report in the proceedings. I appreciate the variety. That bridge was actually, the bridge is a major project, a major investment in the county. It was more than $20 million. It's taken, I believe, probably 7 years or more since planning, which we were involved in that process. And yes, it is complete. It's been widened. There's very safe. It had an impact on us because the entrance road to our complex came off of that bridge, and previously it was on the north side, and it went down a steep hill, and so coming up that, it was difficult to see traffic, and so we were involved in that design process, and it's much safer now than it was. But yes, that bridge is complete, and feel free anytime to like anyone, give us a call, and we're happy to give you a quick tour of the hydro if you're interested. That bridge goes in between the original Lockhart hydro plant, which is just a little downstream, and from the bridge over the Broad River, you can actually see one of those two new hydro plants that I mentioned, the Lockhart minimum flow unit, is visible from the bridge.
Very good. Next time I go through there, I'll have to take a closer look, see if I can just kind of spot some things.
Please let us know. We get a little sensitive if someone just wanders up to our plants, but we're happy to give you a tour.
So another thing that I've heard about Lockhart is that there is a eating establishment there where you can get the best hamburger anywhere. And so I've never been there, but was just wondering, is the place still there? Do you know what I'm talking about?
That will be the Lockhart Cafe, and the burger will be the Broad River Burger, and it's got somewhere between a little bit and a lot of everything on it. And it is well known, remote. And yes, I believe that they're still serving that burger up.
Very good. Have to get over there and try that one of these days. So you get most of your power from Duke, and I'm just kind of curious, do you have other options for buying power? Do you have other connections with generation or supply sources?
Yes. So the Duke PPA, most recently, it used to be a 5-year contract, and so this goes back to prior to 2009. It was a rate that Duke filed for wholesale customers like ourselves. And every 5 years, it was fixed price. Every 5 years, they would adjust the rates. In 2009, Duke restructured that so it's a cost-based formula rate, and they went from a 5-year term to a 10-year term because there's a lot involved in that. The contract's more complicated than it used to be. And so the current version of the contract we're under expires at the end of 2028. So a little over 8 years from now, and so when that gets a little closer and we have some visibility into what the market conditions are, because I imagine, with everything going on these days, the world in 8 years or even 5 years will look much different than it does today, in the energy side of things. And so we would look at alternatives to Duke. Certainly, having been with Duke for a long time, they would be an alternative, but we would also look to the market to see if there are other similar full requirements agreements with, typically it would be a large established utility that would be interested in providing the same quality of service as Duke, for less money. And we would look to the market at that point to see if there are alternatives that would be better for our customers than the contract that Duke would offer at that time.
Okay, and in order to access those other options, would that involve adding transmission or, I guess, paying transportation costs, or how would that work?
Again, even now, there's some legislation that is looking at whether to go to an RTO, so I can't predict what it will be in 8 years, but if that were to happen now, presumably we would not have to add transmission. We would stay with the existing interconnections. We have 3 interconnection points. Actually, I'm sorry, it's grown. We have, technically, it was really 4, but technically 5 interconnection points with Duke's physical system. And 3 of those are in our primary service area. And presumably, we would not expand or change those. But yes, another utility, my understanding is, would have to pay a transportation cost to send their power through Duke's system to get to us as a wholesale customer.
And a minute ago, you mentioned the Buzzard's Roost in Greenwood as being a new asset. Is that something that you manage or that you acquired? And what happens to that power, and how does that relate or connect to your service territory?
So yes, effective, I think, June 1st of 2020 of this year, we assumed operational and maintenance responsibilities and management responsibilities for that project. The model we use is very similar to the model that we used for the Columbia Hydro project back, I think that was in 2010. And so it's a long-term agreement. It's a 25-year agreement with Greenwood County, who owns that facility. They did not want to sell the facility, but they are not in the generation business, and so they've always looked to a partner of some sort to operate and maintain that for them. The power output from that facility, we deliver, at least on paper, we deliver that power back to our system, and so the value for that power flows through a provision in the Duke PPA that allows us to add a limited amount of renewable energy generation and receive a certain value for that limited amount of power. What we're doing, since the value of that power, we are accounting for it in a way so that it does not impact our customers, since obviously we have not pursued commission approval to add that to our rate base. And so our other customers are unimpacted economically by the existence of that plant or that agreement.
And finally, can you tell me something about your capital structure? Who are the owners, and how much debt, how much equity?
Back to the company's origination over 100 years ago, we were owned by a related entity to, or predecessor company to, Milliken and Company. About 14 years ago, in late 2000, I guess 13 years ago, late 2007, Roger Milliken spun off what I think of as an investment part of Milliken and Company. He created a company called Pacolet Milliken, and that basically is the investment arm or investment company, whereas Milliken and Company, of course, is a manufacturing company. And so Lockhart Power was part of that spinoff. And so whereas before the spinoff, we were a wholly owned subsidiary of Milliken and Company, now we are a wholly owned subsidiary of Pacolet Milliken. So that's our ownership structure. That I didn't mention that as one of the unique characteristics. There are several I did not mention. That is one of them. Other traditional investment utilities tend to be publicly traded and publicly owned, whereas we're privately owned. As small as we are, historically we've been 100% equity. When you there's certain economies of scale to going after debt, which we don't have, and so in order to, I'd say, keep our powder dry from a financial perspective, and to avoid the financing costs, we've remained 100% equity.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that update, and also I appreciate the update on the traffic there in Lockhart. Sounds like I'll continue to try that route as opposed to 85. Appreciate it.
Yeah, one good thing about the traffic update in Lockhart is, as with much of our system, it does not change often.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Caston?
Thank you, Vice Chair Belser. Good morning, Mr. Stone.
Good morning.
Not to belabor all the stories of Lockhart, but I was reared about 5 to 10 miles from the plant there, so played Little League at Lockhart. So going to Lockhart was a big deal to me, so that lets you know just how far in the country I must have lived. Question on the Duke PPA contract you guys have that expires in 2028. Is that an evergreen contract?
It is.
Does Lockhart Power maintain, I guess, updated studies that determine, evaluate demand projections, O&M needs? I know you've kind of been through that, the demand projections and all, but I was thinking more in terms of, I guess, maintaining your stuff, like your generators, your equipment. I know you said you run your standby generation and different things such as that to maintain them. But I was curious, do you do studies to look down the road at what's going to be required from a capital point of view or an O&M point of view, or even your projections? Because I know there's been some discussion about the 1% annual growth. So I just threw a whole bunch of stuff in that one bucket, but.
Sure, I think I can give a quick sense on the generation assets in particular. Just the fact that we have the Lockhart hydroelectric plant is over, well, actually this year would be 100 years. It was 1920. So it's hit its centennial mark this year. I guess we should have a celebration. So that's, and again, it's going strong. We've maintained it, very well over its entire history. Those types of plants can, in our perspective, can last indefinitely if they're maintained well. Occasionally, every few decades, you may rewind the generators or you may rehabilitate the turbines, and in between, there's lesser maintenance efforts, to keep those systems going. You upgrade the controls from time to time, and so on. And those are those projects that are typically included in a longer term, capital budget of ours. It tends to be very steady state. In any given time frame, there may be one, depending on the number of generation stations we have, there may be one or two of those projects that are budgeted. And we try to, often those types of projects aren't emergency type projects, and so you have some discretion to be able to space those out. And we try to space those out, obviously, so they don't hit us in any short, more than one or two in any short period of time. We have, from a maintenance perspective, we have maintenance work order type systems. We actually have a system that's that was custom designed, I think by us, certainly for us, and we've stuck with that system because it works fine. It's modest. It's pretty straightforward, but it helps us make sure that all of the routine and preventive and predictive maintenance activities for all of our assets, we're reminded when they are due, and we perform those with an in-house maintenance crew. We have a generation maintenance group that's about 5 people, and we use those for most of the normal maintenance activities. We have a number of operators, so we have 24/7, 365 operations. We have 4 shifts of 2 operators that monitor our entire system, including all of our generation assets. Everything is visible remotely at our operations center, which is in Lockhart. So I know you don't know my background. I've been here for 14 years. The 16 years before I came to Lockhart, I was actually on the large industrial customer side of the fence. And in the 10 years before I came here, or much of the 10 years before I came here, my responsibilities included running a department of about 70 electrical and instrumentation maintenance professionals for a very large chemical and mining complex. So maintenance is actually, is a big part of my background and the different maintenance systems. We don't have a complicated maintenance system, but the one we have is very functional, and we keep up with it. And most importantly, no maintenance system works unless you actually do what the tasks are when they pop them out. And we're very good about that maintenance. And that's one reason we enjoy giving tours when people are interested, is they invariably come back with a very positive impression of how well maintained our facilities are.
So, thank you. It sounds like then Lockhart Power has a managed maintenance program that you try to pre-schedule before something breaks.
Absolutely.
And
the
it's
trick
not,
is always to have.
excuse me.
Uh,
I suspect it's not unusual in many of the mill hydro plants to have 100-year-old generators. I was surprised to hear some time back from someone that they actually ordered some parts off the shelf for that 100-year-old generator. Does that apply to you guys? I mean, how do you maintain 100-year-old equipment? Where do you get parts?
That's a great question. So, for example, some of the bearings are old wood bearings, and there are in the greater Spartanburg area, there are still companies, and they make those bearings. And so, where we can, we buy the original equipment, and where we cannot, we upgrade the systems to what's used currently. But yes, as far as the older plants, it's not terribly unusual to have older hydro plants. I think it was 99 Islands, which is a little upstream of Lockhart on the Broad River, owned by Duke Energy. I believe they hit their 100-year anniversary for that facility a few years ago.
I know I'm plowing the same ground that's been plowed, but the 1% annual growth, I'm fairly familiar with that area also, being born and reared in Westchester, which is smaller than Lockhart. Fairly rural, fairly sparse, but do you guys look at, whether it's census information or whatever, to look at the population projections, say for the next 15 years, 10 years, 20 years?
Typically, we would not.
I'm sorry, you've already kind of discussed the 1%, but tell me again, where did that come from?
So the 1% is, I'd say what we view as a reasonable average long-term growth rate. When I say long-term, I don't mean based on the last 3 years or 5 years. I mean a long-term growth rate. The significant challenge we have is that we don't necessarily base it. Our load is not driven on changes in population and changes in our residential or commercial customer base. Our industrial customer base is in the neighborhood of a third or maybe more at this point, maybe 40% of our total load, and it's actually the majority of our retail load. And so if there's one, and we don't have hundreds of industrial customers, it's closer to 9 or 10. So if we add one customer, that can increase our load by 5% or 10%. And so it becomes, somewhat of a, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but somewhat of a pointless exercise to look at long-term growth trends, because they're so heavily influenced by our industrial load, which cannot be predicted. So we tend to look at longer periods of time when we have, a load forecast. For example, if you would have asked me a couple years ago what would our load be, I would have been off by a pretty high amount, because I would have known at that point that we were about to add, an industrial customer that will be one of our largest industrial customers. So, and then the bottom line is, the information we get from those forecasts is not actionable by us. We're not gonna go build more generation or do anything differently if we have our light load becomes the real world case, or if our heavy load becomes the real world case. It simply doesn't matter from our perspective. It doesn't influence what we do. We'll continue to run all of our renewable energy generation as much as we possibly can, and we'll buy whatever is left from Duke, whether that's a little or a lot.
I understand. One final question, I think. Do you think Lockhart Power is exempt from Act 62?
No, not at all. We're by definition the type of utility that is governed by the act, and so we're not exempt. You know, our perspective is that because the act was, you know, apparently written with a traditional investor-owned utility in mind, which is completely understandable. There are a couple areas that simply don't, you know, they just don't make sense in relation to Lockhart's system. And so when that's the case, you know, we do the best we can to adapt our IRP to the realities of the situation, and that's what we would ask the commission to do as well.
So you think you've met the requirements of Act 62?
Yes, we do. To the extent they're applicable to Lockhart Power.
Thank you, Mr. Stone.
Thank you.
Commissioners, anything further?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Irvin?
thank you. Mr. Stone, it's good to have you with us this morning.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Are any new hydro plants being built now around the country?
I'm sure that there are a few. I actually am not aware of any, and I haven't heard any recent announcements. There's some good reasons for that, but solar and wind have done so well, and their costs have come down dramatically. So I think that's made it more difficult for new hydro to compete based on characteristics of the hydro plants.
You mentioned earlier in your testimony that you found one energy efficiency program that Duke approved. I'm curious to know what that was.
It's the tariff is called our IS-1 on our website, so it's interruptible service, and it's an industrial DSM or demand side management program that under which our industrial customers agree to reduce almost all of their load down to a predetermined level when the system grid is in distress. So when notified, they will do that. And so that provides a valuable benefit to the overall system, not Lockhart's system only, but to the entire Duke system grid, if not beyond, by having companies, you know, voluntarily reduce their loads when necessary for stability.
And so
Another one of those.
would that particular program help with shaving the winter peak demand?
No, sir. It's not a peak shaving program. It's something that is based on grid emergency.
I see. What about weatherization? Have you looked into the possibility of a weatherization program for some of the older textile homes that you mentioned?
Yes, and so the challenge, so much of our territory are old mill towns and old mill homes, old mill villages. The challenge for those is that the wall space, for example, often cannot be insulated. So we're looking at alternatives as part of this housing initiative I mentioned. We're looking at alternatives to getting people into, you know, newer construction homes that have a fraction of the energy costs that the current housing does. Because if you have a home that you know that has a very modest market value, and it's over 100 years old, it's hard for the existing owners to, hard to see a case where it makes sense for them to invest a disproportionately large amount of money into completely redoing the structure of the home just so they can add insulation. But by comparison, it makes a lot more sense, we think, in order to, for there to be, good, normal, I think it was normal, affordable housing opportunities for everyone. And long-term, at some point, those mill villages, those homes will eventually fall down, so there needs to be a long-term transition plan. We're helping develop that with others in the community.
Right. Have you been trying to reach out to home builders and contractors to encourage that kind of dialogue?
That's exactly what we're doing, yes.
Great. Well, I think that's where you start, and I commend you on that effort. I wish you well with it.
Thank you.
If we can reduce the winter peak, that helps everybody, and it helps keep everybody's bills lower, as you know. So it cuts down on having to build, these big generation facilities. And so even though your contribution will be small, it would be important.
Yes,
I
thank
used to
you.
hold,
For,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, thank you. For clarification, because this is something I have not mentioned, I think even in my testimony, and it is relevant in terms of winter peak and summer peak. The way that the structure of our PPA with Duke works, there's an amount we pay for energy, just the number of kilowatt hours, regardless of when we use those. And then there's an amount we pay for demand. The amount we pay for demand is actually determined in 1 hour each year. It's called a 1 hour coincident peak, or shorthand is a 1 CP. And that's a method that Duke uses. So as far as our customers are the ones that wind up paying the bill to Duke. So as far as our customers are concerned, the biggest priority is to try not to have any more power being used during Duke's 1 CP than necessary. Recently that has happened a few times in the winter. Historically, it's more often in the summer. We don't know ahead of time when it will happen, but whenever it happens, that determines a large percentage of our bill. The reason I mention that is our customer, because of the structure of our PPA, our customers do not directly benefit or are impacted by a summer, the higher summer loads or higher winter loads. Those simply don't impact our customers' bills. I just want to make that clarification. I absolutely agree with your point that whatever we can do helps the overall system, which helps everyone. But in terms of direct impact, again, another area where our system is different and our customers benefit differently. A lot of the value for the generation resources that we have, that the ones that are in rate base, a lot of the value for those comes from, and over time will come from, the amount of reduction they have in helping reduce our load during peak period, during the 1 CP.
And you, early in your testimony, you mentioned that you, for the solar rooftop folks, you have a flat fee per month. I'm just curious to know how did you arrive at that fee, and what is it?
Actually, the way I would describe it, it's a minimum bill. We did look at a flat amount, but we chose the minimum bill instead. We had as small as we are, we do not have in-house rate consultants, rate analysts. So we have a consultant that we use to help us with our rates, or if we have a rate case when we do have one, we outsource that because that's a lot less costly over time. And so we used our third-party consultant to identify a reasonable, our best estimate for what the fixed costs of being a Lockhart Power customer for residential, what those fixed costs on average would be. And so that average fixed cost is what our minimum bill is. And so we're not charging them that amount necessarily. the way that, the customers have the option of putting in a little bit of solar or a lot of solar. That's up to them and their circumstance. If they put in a little bit of solar or a fair amount of solar, then their bill will probably be above the minimum bill. And so they'll pay, that means that for all the solar they generate, they get the full retail credit, which is a relatively high rate. If they put in a lot of solar, relative to the size of their load, then they may wind up using less than the minimum amount associated with the bill, and so we would charge them the minimum bill amount to keep our other customers whole. So that's the kind of the philosophy behind that. The most important thing is that minimum bill amount is designed specifically so that our revenue requirements, whether we have 10 or 15 residential solar customers, or 1,000 or 1,500 residential solar customers, our overall system costs should not go up as a result of that program. So the way I think of it in simple terms is all of the customers that are not participating in solar, whether it be because they can't afford to or for other reasons, they're not subsidizing the ones who can and the ones who do.
And what was the amount of the minimum bill now?
If you include, and subject to check, I'm going from memory, but I think if you include the monthly amount, which may be $12 plus the minimum bill, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $47 or $48 a month. So if you put in say a modest-sized solar project associated with your home, rooftop solar, or even I think ground mount solar, then you wanted to minimize how much your bill would be. I think it's less than $50 a month, or right around $50 a month.
If you don't mind me asking, what consultant did you use for that rate-making project?
He's an independent consultant. His background was with a very large utility, but for a long time he's been on his own. His name is Charles Parmalee, and any of our rate cases going back decades probably, he would be the consultant for those. We've had a very long-term relationship with him, and unfortunately, the last rate case, the rate case before last, he said would be the last he would do. We pulled him in for one more, 7 years ago, and after that, he said that he's going to stick with lobstering in the Keys, and that, by gosh, that was going to be the last rate case he does. So I think we're going to have a new face next time around. But we did pull him in for that solar tariff a few years ago.
Finally, I used to be a circuit judge, and I held court in Union County many times. There used to be a little cafe down in Buffalo. Is it still open?
That would probably be the Midway Barbecue.
Right.
So, Jay's the owner, and Jay has something in common, I think, both with me and with the ORS witness, Hyatt, which is, he's a Georgia Tech graduate.
Okay.
I asked him what engineering field he was in, and of course he and his wife own the restaurant, which is by far the most popular in the area, and he said, I consider myself to be a culinary engineer. Midway Barbecue celebrated its 75th anniversary a year or so ago. They're going strong, and yes, one of our mutual favorite places to be in Union.
Give him my best wishes if you see him. Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it. Those are all the questions I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Urban. Commissioners, anything else? Commissioner Caston.
Mr. Stone, I had one more question, something I was trying to discern earlier. I apologize for coming back to you. But I was looking at the service map, which didn't have a lot of detail. It appears that Lockhart Power service area is most of Union County, and it looks like portions of the adjacent counties. And I also thought that I saw a map somewhere that Duke Energy Carolinas also listed that as their service area. So what is your service area? Can you clarify that?
I can try. So it is very irregular shaped, and there's areas because there are other adjacent, or in some cases, interwoven utilities. In certain areas, it's kind of hard to define. But in general, it's a decent amount of Union County. And as a footnote, the city of Union, which is the county seat and, I believe geographically about in the center of Union County, the city of Union has its own electric distribution utility. And the city of Union is actually is our wholesale customer. So similar to how we're Duke's wholesale customer, the city of Union is our wholesale customer. We serve areas outside the city and all around the city. We serve a number of those customers. There's only a few towns that we serve. Otherwise, it's a lot of rural routes. Westchester County would be one of those areas, as was mentioned earlier. But the town of Lockhart, the town of Jonesville, are both in Union County, and then the town of Pacolet is in southeast Spartanburg County. And that whole area, going up Highway 9, along that stretch is in our area, going west on Highway 49, past Union all the way out to the Cross Keys, Cross Anchor type area is in our area. And then parts of the west side of Chester County and part of Cherokee and York. So those are parts of 5 counties, but probably half or more of our customers in Nexus are in the Union area, and Parker County is very close to that. And as a side note, one of our delivery points, we have 3 delivery points with Duke, as I mentioned, well, in the Union and Spartanburg areas. Physically, one of those is right next to Midway Barbecue. Coincidentally, that one substation actually has 4 utilities with infrastructure that go right through there. Now Dominion, Duke, and Broad River Electric Co-op all have infrastructure. So that's one reason it makes it a little challenging to kind of identify exactly where our service area is, but generally that's where it is.
Thank you. It sounds like you pretty much covered the deer and turkey areas that I recall, so.
We have some of our, the biggest events in Union County, and years back I was the president of the Union Chamber of Commerce, are some hunts and big buck, some ATV competitions, and most recently, with the last few years, it's a possum hunt. And interestingly, you would think those would be fairly local events. They pull in, it's amazing, they pull in thousands of people from all over creation. I have someone in the electric utility world that's in North Carolina and was saying how he was down in our neck of the woods, for possum hunters. Or, sorry, not possum, raccoon. Let me get my mammals right, my small mammals right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Caston. Mr. Bowen, any redirect?
Just a couple of quick ones, Madam Chairman. It was brought up a few minutes ago, I think, I can't remember which commissioner brought this up. He asked a question, and I think your response was that as far as industrial loads, that you may have to increase maybe 5 or 10% of your load, maybe a new big industrial customer. What percentage of that would be of Duke's load?
Well, I think we're well under 1% of Duke's load. So the one number, I think to put in comparison, our peak load of 70 to 80 megawatts would be compared to, I think, Duke Energy Carolinas. Now that would include both, their service area in both states. I think their peak load is in the neighborhood of 20,000 megawatts. So, if we have a 1 megawatt or a 5 megawatt customer, Duke's system would never, they just wouldn't see that in any material way. It'd be a small fraction of 0.1% or 0.01%. I'd have to do the math, but it would be unnoticeable. And that's one of the benefits of the PPA with Duke. One of the areas where it helps us to have such a large generation resource. Relatively large swings in our load are immaterial to them. They don't even register, for the most part, for their planning purposes.
So, based on having Duke as your backup like that, do you have to depend on creating new or trying to create new generation facilities?
Not at all. The generation facilities that we've added have been because they provide a long-term benefit for our customers economically and from a risk perspective. There's nothing in our contract or elsewhere that requires us to consider adding generation. In fact, I would imagine Duke would prefer we not add generation. That means we'd be a larger customer of theirs.
Yeah. As far as you talked about the changes in potential growth with industrial customers from time to time that may occur. As far as other changes in usage, is the changes primarily in usage, or is it, other than that, or are changes primarily in climate? And would you please explain?
On a short-term basis, let's say a year-to-year basis, outside of a new industrial customer coming online or leaving, the vast majority of the impact on our system load is going to be from weather, and that can be noticeable in mild events versus extreme weather events. That can be 10, maybe even 20% of our load, peak summer load or peak winter load, if you look at it that way. So weather would have the vast majority of the impact in the short term over a year or two. We don't have the resources because we don't have the need to perform detailed weather forecasting or detailed load forecasting in any way. So I think, my understanding of that load forecasting and the purpose, which makes perfect sense for traditional investor-owned utilities, is obviously you have to be able to plan and meet your long-term supply, or meet your long-term load with your long-term supply. And so they have to perform those, and we want them to do that on our behalf. But since we aren't responsible for balancing our load either instantaneously or in the long term, there's no reason or value to us doing anything more than what we're doing from a load forecasting perspective. If the weather changes, the weather changes. We can't predict what the weather is going to be like next year or the year after. What we can predict is we know with absolute certainty that we will simply buy a little bit more or a little bit less under our Duke PPA, and that'll take care of it for us and our customers.
Last question. I believe Commissioner Caston asked you the question about whether or not you felt like that Lockhart Power is complying with Act 62. I think your response was yes, you felt like you were, that you were not exempt, and that you did comply, considering Lockhart's unique situation as it applies to the statute, et cetera. Is there anything else you'd like to add with respect to that?
I think that certainly summarizes our understanding and our perspective. As we were responding to a variety of questions from the ORS over time, the concept kept coming up, and I think I mentioned in my summary of trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. Maybe it's a round peg in a square hole. Either way, I don't think it fits real well. And so I understand it's a challenge that, for anyone outside of Lockhart Power, who's not familiar with Lockhart Power, it's one thing to hear and understand intellectually that yes, it's different, and here's some reasons why we're different. And it's one thing to hear the implications of those differences, which we've tried to spell out, until you've actually been associated with Lockhart, because I'm still learning things and ramifications of our size and our renewable energy that I wouldn't have expected. It's really hard just to completely get it, certainly in a quick introduction like we've had this morning. And I do appreciate everyone's patience in hearing us describe the company and try to describe why not just that we're unique, which everybody understands, but the actual impact that has on our forecasting, on our IRP in a number of different ways. And so and it's not unusual for us to be overlooked in state level legislation. That actually probably happens more often than not. If you poll the state legislatures, I'm not sure how many of them have heard of Lockhart Power, and those that have heard of us, I doubt that many of them would be able to give you much information or detail about us or our system. So when those things happen, and we do get overlooked in legislation, and it does impact us in some material way, first we try to use a common sense approach to apply the intent and the letter of the legislation to the extent that makes sense. And in some cases where it doesn't make sense, then it doesn't make sense, and then we just say we do the best we can. In our case, it doesn't make sense for us to create entire portfolios of resources when we're not responsible for meeting our demands with supply. It doesn't make sense for us to create a portfolio of portfolios of resources to look at different impacts on our approach, or I'll say our ramp up, to go from, you know, a certain relatively small level of renewables, like most utilities have, to a higher level of renewable adoption, and to look at the impacts of carbon taxes, or what if solar prices are lower versus higher, or what if wind suddenly becomes available onshore in South Carolina, or what if the small modular nuclear reactors, you know, that technology 10 or 15 years from now becomes more affordable. None of that makes sense from our perspective because of several unique characteristics I've already gone through. And so if the statutory language simply does not apply, then it doesn't apply. And we believe the commission, as it has done in the past, including in 1993, has the full capability and authority to be able to address Lockhart's IRP in the appropriate context.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, that's all we have.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen. Mr. Nelson, any limited recross?
No, nothing from ORS, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners?
Vice Chair Belser?
Commissioner Williams?
Thank you. One quick follow-up, and that is, has DEC ever intervened in Lockhart's IRP request?
To my knowledge, in the 14 years I've been here, no one has intervened in any of our IRP requests. Our IRP, and of course, we were under a lengthy list of IRP requirements. I believe there's 18 and one list that goes back to the 1993 order. And so the IRP that we submitted this time around originally is substantially identical to all of the previous iterations that have been accepted by the ORS and the PSC. And there have been no interveners in any of those processes in at least the time frame I've been here, and I don't know that I would know of any, but I'm not aware of any before 14 years ago either.
Thank you.
Mr. Stone, thank you for your testimony today. You may step down. And we've been going for a little while, and I think our court reporter could use a quick break. So let's come back at 12:05, please, and we will start at 12:05. Thank you. Good afternoon, thank you. We will reconvene the hearing in docket number 2019-227-E related to Lockhart Power Company's Integrated Resource Plan. Let's do a quick roll call of commissioners. District 1,
Present in their hearing room?
District 3,
Present.
District 4,
Present virtually.
District 5,
Present in the hearing room.
District 7. And again, our chairman from District 6 is on military leave, and I am present from District 2. Mr. Bowen, are you present?
I'm here along with Lockhart Power's CEO or president.
And ORS?
Madam Chair, Jeff Nelson, along with Andrew Bateman for ORS.
Thank you. Mr. Bowen, we had finished with your witness, Mr. Stone. Do you have anything else?
No, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nelson, are you ready to proceed?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, ma'am. ORS would call as its first witness Mr. Anthony Sandinato.
Let's see where we are. We're still waiting on him to show up on the screen.
We're working on it. He's actually sitting about 10 feet away from me, but we're working to get him.
That's fine.
Jeff, if you're like me, these times frustrate us, right?
This is all too confusing to me.
It is new to me too. This is my first hearing this way, and I tell you, it drives me crazy.
Well, it's about my third or fourth, and it's still driving me crazy.
I'll give you both a laugh. This doesn't frustrate me at all.
Madam Chair, we've known each other a long time, and I understand. Boy.
I hear a siren. Has somebody called in the fire department?
It's a fire truck going by our building down here. I realize our speakers in here were pretty good, but they're really good.
There we go. Mr. Sandinato, please state your name for the record for me.
My name is Anthony Sandinato.
And the court reporter will swear you in, please.
Mr. Sandinato, do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Nelson,
Mr.
please.
Sandinato.
I was just going to say, please go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Sandinato, can you please give your full name and occupation for the commission?
My name is Anthony Sandinato, and I'm employed as a senior regulatory manager at the Office of Regulatory Staff.
And are you the same Anthony Sandinato who pre-filed 5 pages of direct testimony in this docket on October the 20th of this year?
Yes, I am.
If I asked you the same questions today as those that are presented in your pre-filed direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Thank you, Madam Chair. ORS asks the pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. Sandinato be read into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Direct pre-file testimony of Mr. Sandinato will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Sandinato, did you also file an attachment to your direct testimony, which was one confidential exhibit marked Exhibit AMS-1?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to that exhibit?
No, I do not.
Madam Chair, ORS asks that Exhibit AMS-1 be marked for identification and entered into the record, in this case under seal, as the next hearing exhibit.
Let me just inquire, Mr. Bowen, is that correct that the material in that exhibit still needs to be maintained as confidential?
Yes, ma'am, that was agreement of the parties.
Thank you. Mr. Sandinato's pre-filed exhibit, AMS-1, will be marked as hearing exhibit number 3, will be entered into the record of this case, and will be kept under seal. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Santanato, did you also prepare 3 pages of surrebuttal testimony in this docket, which you filed with the commission on December 2nd?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your pre-filed surrebuttal testimony?
No, I do not.
Madam Chair, ORS asks that the pre-filed surrebuttal testimony of Mr. Santanato be read into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Sandonato's pre-filed surrebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Santanato, did you file as an attachment to your surrebuttal testimony one confidential exhibit marked as AMS-1?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your surrebuttal exhibit?
No, I do not.
Thank you, Madam Chair. ORS asks that exhibit AMS-1, which is attached to Mr. Sandonato's surrebuttal testimony, be entered in the record as the next hearing exhibit.
Mr. Nelson, what I'm showing on that exhibit is not confidential. The surrebuttal exhibit is not confidential. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, Madam Chair, you're correct.
Okay. Mr. Sandonato's exhibit AMS-1 attached to his surrebuttal testimony will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 4 and entered into the record of this case.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Sandonato, did you prepare a summary of your direct and surrebuttal testimonies for the commission?
Yes, I did.
Could you please present it for the commission at this time?
Certainly. Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair and members of the commission. The purpose of my direct testimony is to set forth and support ORS's recommendations resulting from the examination and review of Lockhart Power Company's Integrated Resource Plan and associated filings in this docket to determine compliance with certain sections of the South Carolina Energy Freedom Act. ORS retained the consulting services of J. Kennedy & Associates to assist in the review and analysis of the company's IRP. The detailed review of the company's IRP is attached to my testimony as Exhibit AMS-1. Based on our initial review, the company's IRP did not comply with SC Code Annotated 583740B1. ORS made 5 immediate recommendations that the Commission required the company make, which are discussed in greater detail by ORS witness Hayek. The purpose of my surrebuttal testimony is to set forth and support ORS's recommendations in evaluation resulting from the examination and review of Lockhart Power's supplemented Integrated Resource Plan Attachments 2 and 3 and the additional information filed in the company's rebuttal testimony. It is important to note that even though Lockhart is in a unique position due to its size, the 4 requirements contract with Duke, and the fact that the company did not propose to add generation facilities, the company is still obligated to comply with the requirements outlined by South Carolina Code Annotated 583740B1. The Commission in the past has established IRP filing requirements through Order Number 93-950 that were specific to Lockhart. These requirements were superseded by the new requirements outlined by the South Carolina Energy Freedom Act. The company has addressed 2 of the initial 5 recommendations outlined in my direct testimony and report. Lockhart outlined how the company would modify its IRP to try and satisfy the requirements in its rebuttal testimony. ORS witness Hayek will discuss all the recommendations, including the proposed modifications, in greater detail in his surrebuttal. ORS recommends the company file a supplemented IRP with the Commission in this docket to incorporate the changes that were proposed by company witness Stone in his rebuttal testimony, as well as the updated attachments 2 and 3. This concludes my direct and surrebuttal summary.
Thank you, Mr. Sandanato. Madam Chair, Mr. Sandanato is available for cross-examination or questions from the Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Mr. Bowen, any questions for Mr. Sandanato?
Very few. Mr. Santanato, I'd rather call you Anthony instead of your last name. I get tongue twisted on your last name, sorry. Attached to your surrebuttal testimony, you talk about order number 93-950, is that correct?
Yes,
Yeah, and that is attached to your surrebuttal testimony.
that's correct.
Copy that, right. If you look at that, look at page 1 up at the top. It says page 1 of 8. If you look at page 1 of that exhibit to your surrebuttal testimony, at the bottom of that page, it says I'm just quoting from that. It says, 1993, it was brought to the commission's attention that Lockhart Power Company presented a unique situation for the development of an integrated resource plan. Is that right? Is that what it says?
Yes.
Okay. And if you turn over to the next page, beginning at the top of the next page, the commission order says, essentially, Lockhart has unique problems. The commission agreed that Lockhart presented a unique situation. Is that correct? Is that what it says?
That's what it says, yes.
Okay. If you would, turn now over to page 4 of that same exhibit, which continues on with the filing requirements that the commission has with respect to the, as far as the IRP that they issued, or the procedure that they issued in 1993. And on page 4, which is the second page of those procedures, look at F. You look at paragraph F. If you look at the last sentence of that, it says, if I'm reading correctly, in addition, the process, talking about the process as far as Lockhart Power should, and the commission was looking at, should recognize that the limited resources available to small utilities such as Lockhart impact the composition of the IRPs which can be developed and filed by such utilities. Is that a correct reading of that statement of the commission?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Turning over to the next page, page 5, beginning with B, requirements for the development and composition of the IRP filing. Would you agree that a number of those 18 different items that they have over the next few pages, many of those, and most of those, are the same requirements that are continued today?
I believe some of these could be interpreted as such, but Act 62 did set new requirements which all electric utilities are required to include in their IRP.
The new act does tweak that, but some of those are at least the intent and overall are many of them are the same. Would you agree?
I'd agree they're similar.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen. Commissioners? Commissioners? Commissioner Caston?
I have a question. I would say good morning, but I just realized it's good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Is Mr. Stone correct in his assessment that ORS is simply requiring Lockhart Power to check a box?
No, ORS is doing its review based on what is required to be included in the IRP. And it's important to acknowledge that even though this company is a small company, there's still benefits that its customers can receive from an improved planning process.
So ORS believes that Lockhart Power should comply fully, totally with Act 62.
Our evaluation was to determine if the company complied with Act 62, and based on our evaluation, they did not.
Okay, thank you very much.
Commissioners, any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Any redirect? Mr. Nelson, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I turned it off instead of on. Mr. Santanato, was the 1993 order that you referenced in your testimony, 93-950, was that superseded by Act 62 in your opinion?
Yes, in my opinion, it was, yes.
Thank you. No further questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Bowen, any recross?
I'm having problems like Mr. Jeff was having as far as turning it on and off. Yes. As far as the provisions that you say that Lockhart has not complied with, as far as Act 62, are there any provisions in there that Lockhart can provide that does not make them do additional work that really is irrelevant in that they've got a PPA with Duke?
I think ORS witness Hayat would be better to answer that question, but yes, there are ways that the company could evaluate its PPA to meet those requirements, but greater detail could be provided by witness Hayat.
Well, I'm asking you, you're the ORS witness. He's just one of your contractors. And what I'm asking you is to tell us exactly how. As you well know, we have been for 6 months trying to get ORS to tell us how we come into compliance. We've done essentially what we felt like we should do. And what we're asking ORS is, what is it you want us to do to come into compliance?
Madam Chair, I would object to this, is this recross is not directly following my redirect question.
Mr. Nelson?
Madam Chair, we're just trying to...
We're going to overrule that. Go ahead, Mr. Bowen.
Yeah, I was just trying to say, we're trying to get at what we're trying to do. I guess, Madam Chair, what we're trying to say is...
Mr. Bowen, I ruled with you. You going to
Okay.
talk me out of it?
No, ma'am, I'm sorry. Can you help us out here?
For me?
Yes. What is it that Lockhart can do that does not, that it has not done, that's not already taken care of by Duke's PPA? As you well know, Duke's PPA provides for any up or down as far as meeting its forecasts and all of those kind of things. That's what the Duke PPA does. So it covers all the and as far as the resources, other than that, the resources that they have their own generation, they run that all the time, except for that peaking part that they do use for maintenance. So I guess as far as presenting new portfolios and all those kinds of things, how does that, we're not sure what else we can do.
I understand that. I think one of the things that we've been consistent with the company is we've asked you for information on how you evaluated the PPA, how you go about looking at renewable contracts. The company has continued to acquire new renewable resources that it uses in generation, and it's just trying to get the company to be forthcoming and transparent about those processes in its IRP so we can fully evaluate them.
We felt like we have been forthcoming with respect to that, and as a matter of fact, as I mentioned earlier, so what you're telling me is that the 4 different sets of data requests that you've sent us, which was, I've forgotten what, 122 separate questions and fits about 4 inches in a 3-ring binder, didn't sufficiently answer your questions and respond to a 13-page IRP that we filed?
That's a good point, but a lot of those questions, the responses were, the company objected to responding. That information provided just wasn't fully there for the evaluation.
We haven't got any more questions.
Thank you. Mr. Sandinato, thank you for your testimony. You may step down.
Thank you.
Mr. Nelson, you want to call your next witness, please?
Yes, Madam Chair, ORS would call Phil Hayat as its next witness.
Yes, I'm here.
Good afternoon, Mr. Hayat. Please state your name for the record and be sworn by the court reporter.
My name is Philip Hayat.
Mr. Hayat, if you would raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. Hayat, could you please state your name and occupation for the commission?
Yes, my name is Philip Hayat, and I'm Vice President of J. Kennedy and Associates. And happy
Thank
to
you.
provide my
I'm sorry, go ahead.
and my
Business address is 570 Colonial Park Drive, Suite 305, Roswell, Georgia.
Thank you. And are you the same Philip Hayett who pre-filed 12 pages of direct testimony with this commission in docket number 2019-226E on October 20th of this year?
Yes, I am.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No.
And if I asked you the same questions today as those posed in your pre-filed direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
They would.
Thanks. Madam Chair, ORSS, the pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. Hayett be read into the record as if given orally from the stand.
The direct pre-file testimony of Mr. Hayett will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Mr. Hayett, did you file as an attachment to your direct testimony one 14-page exhibit marked as Exhibit PH-1?
Yes.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to that exhibit?
No, I don't.
Thank you, Madam Chair. ORS asks that Exhibit PH-1, which is attached to Mr. Hayett's pre-filed direct testimony, be marked for identification, entered in the record in this case as the next hearing exhibit.
The Exhibit PH-1 attached to Mr. Hayett's direct testimony will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 5 and entered into the record of the case.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Hayett, did you also prepare 17 pages of surrebuttal testimony in this docket, which was filed with the Commission on December 2nd?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your pre-filed surrebuttal testimony?
No, I don't.
Madam Chair, ORS asks the pre-filed surrebuttal testimony of Mr. Hayett be read in the record as if given orally from the stand.
Surrebuttal testimony of, the pre-filed surrebuttal testimony of Mr. Hayett will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you. Mr. Hayett, did you also intend to adopt the 7 pages of pre-filed direct testimony of Samuel Wyrabeck, which was filed with this commission on October 20th?
Yes.
And could you please state for the commission what your relationship to Mr. Wyrabeck is?
Yes, Mr. Wyrabeck was a consultant and a coworker at J. Kennedy & Associates, and he subsequently left our firm to pursue other interests.
And are you then intimately familiar with Mr. Wyrabeck's testimony?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Is there any questions from either opposing counsel or the commission concerning Mr. Wyrabeck's testimony?
Yes, I will.
And do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to his pre-filed direct testimony?
No.
Thank you. Madam Chair, ORS offers in the record as if given orally from the stand the 7 pages of direct testimony of Mr. Samuel Wyrabeck, filed with this commission on October 20th.
The pre-filed testimony, direct pre-filed testimony of Mr. This witness.
Wyrabeck.
Thank you. Wyrabeck, as adopted by witness Hayett, will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Hayett, could you please describe your educational background and professional experience so the commissioners are aware of you?
Yes, I received a Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical Engineering from Purdue University and a Master's degree from Georgia Tech with a specialization in Power Systems Analysis. I have 40 years of experience in the electric utility industry, and I've worked in areas of resource planning, economic analysis, generation operations, rate analysis, utility policy analysis. I was employed from 79 to 96 by firm Energy Management Associates. I supported their vendors, clients, that vendor's clients. And then in 96, I formed my own firm called Hayett Power Systems Consulting, where I offered similar consulting services throughout the U.S. and internationally. In 2000, I continued to work for that firm, but I also joined the firm of J. Kennedy & Associates, at which time I became, in 2015, actually, we merged our businesses together, and I became vice president of Kennedy & Associates. I have testified as an expert witness in about 100 cases in states across the U.S., including Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, Louisiana, Minnesota, South Carolina, Utah, Wisconsin, Wyoming, and in front of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission.
And Mr. Hayat, have you previously testified before this commission?
Yes, I recently testified in Dominion Energy South Carolina Inc.'s 2020 IRP, proceeding in docket 2019-226-E.
And could you please describe for us the scope of your review of the company's integrated resource plan?
Yes, Kennedy Associates was engaged by ORS to perform a comprehensive review of the company's IRP filing and evaluated whether LPC Lockhart Power, I might refer to as LPC, complied with the requirements of Section 40. As part of that review, Kennedy Associates investigated the historical context of the IRP process in South Carolina, including the Act 62 requirements, prior company IRP filings, as well as other regulatory filings and commission precedents. Kennedy Associates reviewed all of the significant features of Lockhart's IRP and supporting documentation, including information about generation resources, peak and energy forecast, and LPC's resource plan.
And what were your conclusions with respect to the company's compliance with the requirements of Section 40 as amended by Act 62 as set forth in the ORS report?
ORS concluded that the company did not meet all the requirements of Act 62, particularly the requirement to include several resource portfolios developed with the purpose of fairly evaluating the range of demand side, supply side, storage, and other technologies and services that are available to meet the utility service obligations. The only plan reflected in the IRP is the system as it currently exists, without consideration of the upcoming expiration of sales contracts for certain renewable resources, of the addition of any new renewable resources that are possible, such as solar or batteries, and alternatives to its full requirements contract with Duke Energy Carolinas, which I would add will expire during the 15-year planning horizon. ORS's overall conclusion is that Lockhart did not fully comply with the Section 40 IRP amendments in Act 62.
Mr. Hayek, can you please characterize the recommendations identified in the ORS report?
Yes. The report includes a series of 10 recommendations that relate to the company's compliance with Section 40. Specifically, it addresses energy and peak load forecasts, development of resource portfolios, discussion of demand-side management programs, development of fuel price sensitivities, economic analyses, and other items that should be included in the company's IRP report. The recommendations are separated into two categories. The first consists of 5 recommendations ORS believes should be addressed now within the context of this IRP proceeding, and the second consists of 5 recommendations ORS believes could be addressed over a longer term, such as by the next IRP update in 2021, but no later than the next comprehensive IRP in 2023.
Will you please provide an overview of your conclusions and recommendations after a review of the company's rebuttal testimony in this case?
Yes. After having reviewed the company's rebuttal testimony that responded to my 5 immediate recommendations, I determined that 2 are now resolved and 3 remain unresolved. Recommendation 1 has been completely resolved as the company has updated the baseload forecast in attachments 2 and 3 to also include low and high load forecast as required by the statute. Recommendation 4 requires the company to provide more detailed discussion of DSM programs in its IRP. This has been resolved as the company has committed to provide this information when it proposes new DSM programs in the future. The Commission should include this commitment in its order. Recommendations 3, 5, and 6 are the immediate recommendations that remain unresolved and all pertain to requirements to develop and evaluate scenarios that are required by different paragraphs of Act 62, Section 40. Recommendation 3 requires that alternative resource portfolios should be developed consisting of demand side, supply side, storage, and other resource options. Recommendation 5 requires different risk scenarios to be considered, and recommendation 6 requires the company to develop methodologies to produce cost estimates for the scenarios. The company asserts that because of its size, its full requirements contract with Duke, and the renewable resources that it has already acquired, the provisions of Section 40 cannot be applied in the same way as for other IOUs. ORS does not dispute that these characteristics distinguish Lockhart Power from the other IOUs. However, Act 62 provides no exemptions based on size, and the company did not provide any analyses to the level of transparency expected under Act 62. The fact that Lockhart Power has acquired renewable resources and implemented DSM indicates there is value in evaluating alternatives, which is the goal of an IRP. I noted in my testimony that despite its size, there are scenarios that Lockhart Power could evaluate in the context of an IRP, including the possibility of acquiring some solar and energy storage resources, implementing energy efficiency programs, determining if certain renewable sales contracts should be extended, which the company will have to do in the very near future, and evaluating alternatives to the Duke full requirements contract. With regard to recommendation 3, 5, and 6, ORS ultimately recommends that the commission determine whether to require Lockhart Power to comply with the Act 62 requirements by modifying its IRP in this proceeding. One further point for the commission's consideration is that, of course, Mr. Sandinato mentions in the rebuttal testimony that the commission in the past established IRP filing requirements specifically for Lockhart Power's IRP. After reviewing the company's, I think I'll end right there.
Thank you. In your review of the company's rebuttal testimony, Mr. Hayat, what are your conclusions regarding your 5 long-term recommendations?
The company did not object to any of the 5 longer-term recommendations. Recommendation 2 arose based on my concern about the quality of the company's load forecasting methodology. While I recognize that load forecasting may be challenging for a utility the size of Lockhart Power, any utility, regardless of its size, should still attempt to accurately forecast its system load for various planning and budgeting purposes. The commission should require the company to consider improving its load forecasting methodology by no later than the 2023 IRP, and the company stated that that is something it's willing to consider by that point. Recommendation 7 concerns the inclusion of an action plan in the IRP, and ORS recommends the commission require the company to include one beginning in its 2021 IRP update. Recommendation 8 and 9 both relate to Duke's full requirement PPA contract. Recommendation 8 requires Lockhart Power to evaluate alternatives to Duke PPA in future IRPs. And recommendation 9 requires the company to evaluate whether there would be benefits to rely on a competitive solicitation process to pursue its next full requirements PPA. ORS recommends the commission require the company to address these issues by no later than the 2023 IRP. Recommendation 10 relates to the PPA contracts that are used to sell some of the company's renewable resources to a third party. This requires the company to conduct evaluations in the IRP to determine if customers would be better off if the company's renewable energy resources were used to serve native load. The company should be required to evaluate this no later than the next comprehensive IRP in 2023. Those are all recommendations that had been included in the report. that was filed, and it was connected to Mr. Sandonato's direct testimony. Recommendation 11 is a new recommendation, and it appeared in the SIR rebuttal testimony, in my SIR rebuttal testimony. And it's a new recommendation that the ORS proposed in rebuttal, which would require the company to file a supplemental IRP that includes all the revisions that it discussed in rebuttal testimony, as well as the updated attachments 2 and 3.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Does that conclude your testimony?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Mr. Hayes is available for questions from opposing counsel and the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Mr. Bowen, any cross-exam for the witness?
Excuse me, my assistants were helping me make sure I get it straight here. Madam Chair, yes, just a little bit of confusion on my behalf, and I'm sorry. If the witness would turn to page 4 of 17 of his testimony, SIR rebuttal testimony.
Yes, I'm there.
Okay. On line 19 through 22, he says, Table 1, or you say, Table 1 contains immediate recommendations, and Table 2 contains longer-term recommendations should be addressed as soon as possible, preferably in the next annual update, but no later than the next comprehensive IRP in 2023. Is that right?
Yeah.
So basically, no later than the next comprehensive.
That's correct.
Okay. So as far as
I think there may be one, I don't want to get ahead of you, but there might be one has been slightly changed since the direct testimony. And there was one new recommendation added.
You're right on spot. That's exactly where I was going. Go ahead. What's your explanation for that?
When you say that, are you referring to the inclusion of 3-year?
Well, I'll tell you where I was going. If you look at your SIR rebuttal testimony on page 16 of 17, okay, let's look at your recommendations 7, 8, 9, and 10. Of those recommendations, all of them are consistent with your statement on page 4, no later than the next comprehensive IRP in 2023, except for recommendation 7, and you say that ought to be in 2021.
Yes, that was a change since our direct testimony, because we believe that that's something that could be, that's sort of a policy issue. That just simply is for the company to provide an action plan, and we think that should be done fairly soon in the next IRP. So it's not as short-term as doing it in this IRP, but we think it's something that could be done in the next IRP, the IRP update. That's correct.
Okay. You have no problem with us disagreeing with that, right?
I do have a problem, however, you have a right.
Okay, thank you. As far as the company looking at and preparing for the Duke PPA renewal, if you will, did I understand your summary a few minutes ago to say that the company should be acting on that now?
We're saying by the next, the recommendation that we've made is by the next IRP, the next comprehensive IRP in 2023, no later than that.
Okay, and a proposed document that was sent to us as far as what your proposed plan was, that we should continue to evaluate the Duke PPA several years before 2028. What you're saying now is that they should do that 5 years before 2028?
Well, what we're saying is this: the IRP isn't an analysis required to look at what decision you're going to make tomorrow, or how we're going to serve our customers, today, tomorrow, the next day. It's an IRP process is to develop a plan over the next 15 years. Over the next 15 years, at some point, 2028, you need to replace the Duke PPA contract or use the evergreen provision and allow that to just simply to continue. You have stated that there are options. It could have been possible that there are no options, but there are options that you could do to replace that. One of the things that we've suggested and discussed, and a recommendation, is that you consider doing a competitive solicitation process. I'm very familiar with those. In fact, there's a co-op that I'm dealing with who has begun a process to look at replacing its full requirements contracts in 2019 for replacement in 2026. These kinds of things do have to be looked at way in advance. Over the 15-year period of my IRP, since you'll have to replace that, it'd be good to start looking at alternative options, alternative scenarios, if you will, for the replacement of that contract. And might it be possible to identify, for the benefit of the ratepayers, anything that could be lower in cost in that point in time? That's what we're really getting at.
Would it surprise you to know that the company has already started looking at various alternatives as far as different suppliers, but as far as the company's concerned, it's too far out to look out 8 years prior to the expiration?
No, it doesn't surprise me. One of the issues is that we had is that we did have to ask 4 sets of discovery requests to attempt to try to get information. One of the issues that we're also trying to promote in the case of Lockhart is a lot of this kind of information can be discussed. We're not necessarily suggesting that you put confidential information into your IRP, but we are suggesting that you do include some of this information that has been certainly revealed today in this hearing that you've spoken about. These are the kinds of things that should go into the IRP. Plus, I would say, once again, in terms of getting started, if you do a competitive solicitation, you may have to do that many years way in advance.
That's not gonna answer. Okay, thanks. I understand what you're saying. That's all the question we have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen. Commissioners? Commissioner Williams?
Thank you, Vice Chair Belzer. Mr. Hyatt, I'm going to ask a question that may not have an answer, but would you anticipate that the DEC IRP would be helpful in answering some of the questions that remain unanswered in the Lockhart IRP?
The DEC IRP gets at the notion of what are the costs that over the long term that the PPA cost to Lockhart would be. So yes, some of the risks that are analyzed in the DEC PPA will result in the impacts that are going to affect Lockhart. So yes, to a certain extent. But here's where the difference I would make is that at least 25%, 20 to 25% of the energy supplied comes through resources that are under the control of the company. And those have been done. I'll even point to a statement that the company has made, and they're correct about this. no requirement for additional or alternative resources to serve its load. However, Lockhart has pursued specific renewable generation projects over time in order to minimize the reliance upon a third party's generation, reduce its exposure to fossil fuel related cost risk and environmental liability risk, and generally better position Lockhart to control its own long-term destiny. And we agree with that. So the point is that while Duke represents the proper measure of reliability to serve the customer load and any increase in demand, the other question that has to be asked is, over the long term, the next 15 years, can we assume that the reliance on the Duke contract over that 15-year planning horizon will lead to least cost for customers? And there's no cost-based evaluation whatsoever presented in Lockhart, not even for its preferred plan that it has provided. So we have no basis to compare, to even know what the cost projection is expected for its base preferred plan, and we have nothing to compare it to for any alternatives that it can consider, and there are some. I outlined those in my summary.
Thank you, Mr. Hyatt.
Other commissioners? Commissioner Powers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Hyatt, looking at number 10 that you had about the company conducting analysis to determine if it continued to sell some of its owned resources, are you thinking that they should increase what they get from Duke or from another carrier, or what is it that you're talking about they should sell or not sell?
Certainly. Lockhart has, to its credit, over the years acquired these renewable resources, and they're in rate base and customers pay for them. But there are a few of the renewable resources that are sold under contract to a third party. So while the customers are paying for those are actually, the energy output is actually being sold to a third party. The customer gets a benefit, however, because the revenues achieved from those sales do go to offset the cost that the customer have to pay. So I'm not trying to make an issue out of that. But at the point in time when those contracts expire, and there are at least a few of those, one in this year and a couple in a few other in the near term, when those expire, the company must evaluate those and determine if over the long term, for example, the 15-year horizon of the IRP, would customers be better off if the company used those to serve load, or would the company be better off if the company continues to sell those, use the revenues to offset costs, and then go out and buy the replacement power from Duke, essentially. If it gets more money in the sales, then it should basically go ahead and sell. But those are the kinds of evaluations that one has to conduct by looking at the future, making assumptions, doing analysis, and those are the kinds of studies that ought to be performed as part of the IRP, so the company can report that it does have this resource planning issue it has to consider, and there could be benefits to the customers. I grant you the company is small. We get that. And we get that its resources are limited. But if you do consider the long term of the customers, can customers' cost over the long term be minimized? And we think that there are ways that it can. Now, maybe the company has evaluated it and it's conducted its own studies, and it knows that absolutely, this is the preferred plan and least cost buy-in and meets all the requirements of the statute in terms of meeting the factors that are discussed in the statute. But we don't have the evidence. It hasn't been provided. There's no filing of analyses, no alternative scenarios, no consideration of different risks. And because of that, we came to the conclusion that the company hasn't met the requirements.
Thank you, sir.
Vice Chair Belser.
Commissioner Caston.
Thank you, Mr. Hayat. Few questions. I'll try to do them in some kind of order, but right now I'm struggling with the order because I'm sensing frustration on Lockhart Power's side in that, okay, I'm not sure what you want us to do. And listening to you, you're saying, well, this is what you do. This is what we've suggested. And I want to make sure I'm getting my head around it. The alternative to scenarios you were talking about are things that they should look at or consider. Remind me again, what were some of those?
Okay. Well, for one thing, it could be the company has said that they monitor solar resources and battery technology. And they monitor it, they're aware of the costs, they recognize the costs have fallen. In fact, in one of the IRP responses, they state that based on recent solar resource price trends, they expect that they'll consider it in the future, in a future IRP. We may see it in the next IRP. So the notion, so that's one of the resources that could be considered as an alternative. So what would that mean? If they're permitted within the contract, and to the certain extent they are, they could add solar resources to their system, and that would reduce the cost, and that would meet the other objectives that they note, where they try to control the destiny, reduce its exposure to fuel-related risks, and the reliance on a third-party generation. Another area that they have to evaluate as a resource planning sort of analysis is the PPA contracts that come up for renewal. They have to make a decision about that. There's one they've already made a decision about, yet we don't really know any sort of analysis that was conducted, and that's the point of supplying information in an IRP. And then the third area that we've suggested that they could do is, in the context of the IRP, they could do evaluations to look at potential options to the Duke PPA contract. What if we restructure the contract going forward at the next renewal? What if we were to take on additional solar resources instead of the Duke contract? Maybe there could be the potential for cost savings, but we don't know because there's no analysis provided. And that's simply what we're saying is we're suggesting that the commissioners have a decision to make whether or not you accept the notion that because it's a small company with small resources, which it is, should they be compelled to do these additional studies presented in the IRP, or should they have certain dispensation similar to what was done perhaps in the 1993 IRP order? And that's all we're suggesting.
Do you concur with Mr. Stone's comments about ORS simply wanting them to check the box?
I don't entirely. I'll accept it to a certain point. I don't entirely. Yes, they didn't provide reload forecasts. They didn't provide low, mod, high, for example. That's typical. They've now come back and done that. In that regard, you could suggest, well, maybe that's checked the box. However, you could also suggest that the reason for looking at low, mod, high is because you conduct analysis to say, How could we change the terms of the PPA contract in 2028 so that over the long term, if we have the high actually happens, how do we serve load at the lowest possible cost? And lowest possible cost provides the greatest benefit to the customer. So that to a certain extent, I would agree. However, there is a reason for wanting the information and the analysis to be done.
If I understood Mr. Stone correctly, he said the contract they had with Duke was an evergreen contract.
That's correct.
So I know that, as I understand those, I guess it's not a guaranteed thing, but it's guaranteed unless somebody, one of the two people in the contract want out of it at that period of time. Is that a correct understanding?
That is. But if I could add, if I might be permitted, that gets to the notion of to me, that gets to the notion of reliability. The fact that it has the evergreen contract and it pretty much gives a certainty, because we've got a long history here that the contract has been supplied by Duke. It gives sort of a certainty of reliability that Duke will be there and Duke will continue into the future. What it doesn't give is an answer to the question of the lease cost, the benefit to the ratepayer over the long term. And because it's a contract that could be, that they don't have to re-enter at the end of the period, if they were to give notice, then they have the opportunity to restructure the contract. They have the opportunity to go out to find another supplier. And as we've heard today, the company does have other suppliers. There are other suppliers. So it boils down to a question of economics. And what we don't know is whether or not, at the point in time that they would restructure, whether or not it's the least cost thing to do. And that's all we're suggesting. And IRP is a kind of a vehicle where typically these kinds of planning decisions can be evaluated.
So do any of these other options they have to develop a PPA instead of Duke Energy Carolinas, would those other electrical entities be required to sell them electricity?
Yes, and I believe that that's not an issue. In other words, again, I think what your question is getting to is reliability. And we attempted through discovery to find out if the other entities could provide the service, and the company believes that they can. So then it comes down to a question of economics and lease costs and benefits to the customer. And so those are the questions that are really outstanding and that has to be addressed. And that's what we're trying to get at, is that there's no analysis, there's no evaluation. We know the company will conduct an evaluation because they provided us with an evaluation they conducted in the past. So we're not doubting that an evaluation will be conducted. But as part of the IRP, these are the kinds of things that do get, generally with utilities, do get evaluated. The significant resource planning decisions that a utility has to make during the planning horizon do get considered within the context of the IRP.
So relative to the questions I think you had expressed in your testimony about fuel cost, environmental issues, things that they were not looking at, and as I understood Mr. Stone to say, is that should they have any responsibility for looking at Duke Energy's portion of that, which how would you answer that question?
That's a very good question. No, I don't, and I don't believe I put in anywhere in testimony that said, look, go evaluate Duke, consider their risk. What I do think that as applicable to Lockhart is the PPA cost. And so you can, as utilities typically do, they develop assumptions. And for Lockhart, the assumptions that they need to consider for risk is what would happen to the Duke PPA costs. So that's the corollary to another utility, and we recognize there are characteristics that are different. I've said that over and over. But the corollary for Lockhart is the PPA costs that are supplying 75% of their costs. They could look at, make an assumption that again, here's a low case, a mod case, a high case on what those PPA costs could be, and they could do analysis based on that to determine, should we consider acquiring 5 megawatts of solar, for example. Those are the kinds of studies with risk analysis that would be applicable in the case of Lockhart.
Are you familiar with their service area?
I through my research, yes, sir.
So it's not necessarily a check the box, or it could be a check the box, but the bottom line, in your opinion, is they do not meet all the requirements of Act 62, that section.
Right. To a certain extent, I say I agree. It is check the box. However, I go beyond that, and I simply say that it would be good to have additional analysis and evaluation as part of their IRP. That would be for the purpose of being transparent, for the purpose of the commission knowing that they are considering the alternatives, for the purpose of the commission to know how they're considering alternatives, what they're looking at in terms of solar, what they might be considering. But on the other side, which I'll put straight forth, is that the commission must consider the characteristics they are pointing out, the size, the staffing level. There is an issue, and if the commission believes that, the commission has taken action in the past to provide a means by which you have to abide by the number one consideration. I think, just my recommendation, is the commission, of course, has to abide by the statute, cannot not abide by the statute. However, the commission has the ability within the terms of the statute to promulgate regulations, and could do so for Lockhart, similar to the 1993 action that the commission took.
If reading from the statute, C2, last sentence, says to determine whether the integrated resource plan is the most reasonable and prudent means of meeting energy and capacity needs, the commission, in its discretion, shall consider whether the plan appropriately balances the following factors. And it goes through those factors that I think ORS has listed too, I think. If hearing the testimony from Mr. Stone, they believe that theirs appropriately balances those things. Hearing from you and Mr. Sodonato, you, you feel it doesn't meet the specific items in the statute. So,
That's correct. And I could elaborate and tell you that we think that certainly anywhere here that's reliability, they meet that completely. They've designed a reliable system. They have gone out and they have attempted to acquire renewable resources over time. We think that those things are good, but we don't think that there's any information on evaluation of lease costs for the next 15 years. We think that they've got a preferred plan. They know they can reliably serve their customers, but what we don't have is the information of them telling us, are there options that you could do to lower the cost for the customer? And I've laid out a few things that they could look at, and if they analyze, those could potentially be opportunities for lowering costs over the 15-year period.
what is the appropriate amount for them to spend to look at some of these things?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, because ultimately the costs do come down to the ratepayer. So if to me, you know, between this IRP and maybe the next IRP, we certainly would like to see evidence of why they believe that their preferred plan is to be the least cost plan. In other words, they suggest that they balance these factors, and they do achieve some of these factors, and not all of them. And the biggest concern, of course, I keep saying, is economics and least cost. We think that they ought to be able to spend some amount to look at these factors, provide analysis, show you that yes, indeed, the preferred plan is the plan to achieve. How much? You know, they said they spend money on, I don't know what they spend exactly on the rate case when they do a rate case, and they told you that they hire a consultant. I don't know how much they spend on the rate case consultant, but I would think they'd have the possibility to hire a consultant to help them to look at a few things in a way that they'd be comfortable with, provide an evaluation, and provide convincing evidence that this truly is least cost, that they couldn't just acquire, you know, additional solar. Again, I point to the fact that companies suggested that we might see that. They might present solar. They might include solar in the next IRP. We could have seen them included in this IRP. So I think sometime in the next between this and the next IRP, we should see that.
Thank you, Mr. Hatt.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions?
Madam Forelady? Madam
Commissioner
Vice
Irvin?
Chair?
Commissioner
Thank you.
Irvin?
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Hyatt,
Yes, hi.
it's good to have you with us this afternoon. I wanted to follow up on a couple of Commissioner Caston's questions. Given the fact that the commission has some discretion, as outlined in the statutory provision, don't you think there's such a thing as substantial compliance? And would you concede that, given the size of the company, that it's reasonable to take that into consideration in this particular case?
I would have to say yes. I do. I think it's reasonable to take factors into consideration. I think we've been consistent. We brought forth the 1993 order to point out that consideration has been made. We've recognized that Lockhart is small. They have the PPA. They've done renewables. The element that we think is missing is that the future, proving that the plan that they promote as their plan is least cost, that part doesn't exist. And so that's the part that you know, that I'm a little troubled by, but
There's
like
still
given the
time for
size,
them to,
maybe that's,
there's time for them to work on that. I mean, we're talking about a 15-year plan, so you would concede that if they would at least agree to begin looking at, for example, the PPA renewal by 2023 and coming up with a written plan for alternatives, is it my understanding that that would satisfy you?
yes, I think so. If they would begin to look at those things and present information and show how their plan is least cost and how they've considered alternatives and look at the possibility of solar resources addition, evaluate what they're permitted to do within the contract, what they're not, explain that in their IRP. And like they said, they may actually include it in a future IRP. But we'd like, if they include it, we'd like to see why they believe it was more economic than just depending on Duke, who's including solar resources in its IRP. So, you know, either it really cuts both ways. If they come to the commission and said, we want to have you certify a new resource that we're going to do, assuming they have to. But if they did, then you'd want to know that solar resource is actually more economic than just depending on Duke. And so those are the kinds of analysis that we'd like to see be provided.
I understand, and I think that's fair, given that you're taking a long-term view. But you wouldn't contend that the 2020 IRP is fatally defective simply because they don't yet have a plan for a PPA renewal in 2028, would you? I mean, they still got some time to work on it.
Yes, I agree with you completely. In fact, the recommendation that we made in that area said that they should do by the 2023 IRP. They do have time.
That's right. And so, given their size and given their unusual posture of being 100% renewable, which I don't know of any other investor-owned utility in the nation that could say that. Do you? Is there one out there that's 100% renewable sources?
Well, I think just simply to be clear, I think in the proper way is 100% of resources owned by the company
right
are renewable, and that serves 25% of their energy requirements. The other 75%, you can argue, is composed of renewable resources as well, but they're Dukes. So some of it is possible.
Sure. I guess my point is that they're so unlike most large investor-owned utilities that we see that it almost puts them in a category all by themselves, doesn't it?
It does. They are. Let me say it this way. I agree with you completely. They are small, 100% equity. Most IOUs are, 50% equity, 50% debt. Extremely small. So yes, they are totally different. Now, the one other side of the coin, however, is those customers that are not in Duke, not a Duke customer, not a Dominion customer, may want to have the same type of resources available to them, energy efficiency, for example, or they might want their utility to look at additional solar. And because of size, they can. So that is the other side of the coin.
That's right. So if we, for example, required them to go out and put out a request for proposal for X amount of, solar, they, they would have to go out into the market and borrow money for the purchase and installation and maintenance of that system and pass that along to ratepayers, correct?
Correct. And I am in no way suggesting to you that I think they ought to go out and do it without the proper analysis.
That's right.
To me-
So I guess
to
what,
me,
that's right. So really what we're talking about is timing, as much as anything, is when is it appropriate to begin the process of long-term planning and to what degree? You agree with my thesis there?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, given that, it wouldn't be unreasonable if we found that the 2020 IRP was reasonable and prudent, but that that the 2020 was reasonable and prudent, but that by 2023, we wanted more specificity about how to address these other issues that you've mentioned that are still outstanding, right?
That's correct. I think that's really consistent with our testimony.
And if we simply made that requirement, if we approved it with the modification that they come back in 2023 with specific plans that are left unresolved, so to speak, one being the PPA, I guess that'd be the primary concern, is the PPA renewal and what alternatives might be less costly. If they began that in 2023, you'd be satisfied.
Yes. Yes, sir.
No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Irvin. Any other questions, commissioners? Mr. Hyatt, I have just a couple of questions. In your review and your analysis, did you have the opportunity to review the PPA between Lockhart and Duke?
Yes, I did.
And I believe I understood from Mr. Stone that Lockhart is very limited in what generation resources they could build or acquire or include at this point. Is there a limitation in the PPA for that?
Commissioner, there are limitations, but there are also provisions that allow them to do so. So they do have to make an analysis to determine how much can we add. There are limits. Now,
Okay.
if I get into,
I don't want to
talking about
get too far because I'm sure that's a confidential document or proprietary. So, but I just wanted to touch on that. That's all I have, Mr. Hyatt. Mr. Nelson, any redirect? Oh, I'm sorry.
No redirect.
I apologize, Mr. Nelson. I missed a light here. Commissioner Thomas, I apologize.
Thank you. I just have one question here, and it just kind of relates to, based on your experience, and this is, as we've all said, a pretty unique situation. But is there anything that you could see that you believe would be potential just low-hanging fruit where you might really be able to get a big bang for your buck in terms of, what's best for the customer? Just one or two ideas. Are you comfortable with expressing that sort of an opinion?
I think I probably would come back to some of the things I've talked about. One is a low-hanging fruit evaluation. Given the decline in solar, they should look at the possibility of solar additions, and that to the extent that the PPA contract would permit it. That's one notion. Another low-hanging fruit that we talked about was when these contracts come up for renewal, and it actually may be before the next IRP, or it might be timed around it. I don't want to get into too much of those potentially confidential details. But the second item is looking at the potential value in bringing back these contracts, these renewable resources that they're currently selling, and use it to serve native load, and looking at whether there would be a benefit to customers of doing that versus continuing to sell those to the energy from those to a third party. So there might be some benefit. I just don't know the magnitude of these benefits because none of the information or analysis has been revealed to us. So that's part of the problem, and that's why I think it's a good idea to get them to look at these things, present it, and maybe they already know something. Maybe the results show something but that information should be presented to the commissioners. And then, of course, the third area is to start in this consideration of the PPA, the potential for replacement of that. And one idea that I had was, well, they could do a competitive solicitation process, just like, for example, I spoke about this in my testimony. There's a utility 1803 I'm familiar with in Louisiana, which it had for many, many years a contract for full requirements with one supplier, and now it's going out and it's seeking to replace that. And one of the possibilities is that it'll continue with that full requirements contract with the same supplier, or maybe it'll be able to have another supplier provided. So that's the third area that I've really spoken about, and we're hopeful that those things will be considered, and maybe the company is and has and could explain it, and everything that they're doing is perfectly reasonable. But we don't know because we haven't had the information supplied.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now, Mr. Nelson, any redirect?
No redirect. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Hyatt, you may step down. Thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Nelson, anything further?
Nothing further from ORS, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Mr. Bowen, anything further?
We appreciate very much the commissioner's questions. Excuse me, I forgot to put that back on. We appreciate all the commissioners' questions and their attention in this case. We felt like all your questions were very insightful, and we appreciate that, and thank you very much for your attention.
Gentlemen, I know that the court reporter has a number of matters pending before. I think if it will meet with your approval, that we will instruct staff counsel to coordinate proposed orders from you at a date, working with the court reporter schedule, if y'all are requiring a transcript, or if not, then working with your schedules on that. I believe the date that the order has to be out is somewhere in April. Does April 13th sound correct? April 12th, 13th, is that right? Have y'all calculated that yet?
We have not.
Okay.
We have not either, Madam Chair.
Well, I'm kind of doing some back of the envelope calculations, so that's not set in stone, but I think that's what we're looking at. So if it meets with your approval, we'll just instruct staff counsel to contact y'all to work out a date for proposed orders. Is that okay?
That sounds good to us.
Madam Chair, I would like to say I think ORS, we would prefer, if possible, just to file a post-hearing brief in this as opposed to a proposed order. I know that the tone of this hearing sounded a little like a contested case, but we believe that our job in this was simply to review the IRP, offer our recommendations to the commission, and ultimately it's the commission's decision on how to proceed and whether or not that the company complied with the statute or is entitled to certain exemptions. So I believe a brief on our part would be more appropriate if you would allow us to do that.
Okay, well, whatever that date is, that we'll let y'all work out with staff counsel, if that's okay. Thank you all. Ms. Joe, you want us to go over the exhibits? Mr. Nelson, Mr. Nelson, there was an exhibit attached to Mr. Wyrabeck's testimony. I believe it was his, experience, and it was not offered. Is that correct?
It was not, and I don't believe that needs to be put into evidence. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. I think we have a total of 5 exhibits, and Ms. Dukes will go over those with you real quick, if you would, just so we make sure we're on the same page.
Yes, Madam Vice Chair. For Exhibit 1, I have a composite exhibit, which includes Lockhart's IRP that was filed with the Commission on June 17th, 2020. I apologize. And it also includes a revised Attachment 1, which was filed with the Commission on July 20th, 2020. For Exhibit number 2, I have the direct testimony, rebuttal testimony, and pre-filed Exhibit BDS-1 to Brian Stone, for Brian Stone. Exhibit number 3 is the Exhibit AMS-1 that was attached to the pre-filed direct testimony of Anthony Sandonato. Exhibit number 4 is Exhibit AMS-1 that was attached to the pre-filed surrebuttal testimony of Anthony Sandonato. And Exhibit number 5 is Exhibit PH-1 that was attached to the pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. Philip Hyatt.
Any questions on the exhibits?
No questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you all. I'm sorry we ran a little bit long this morning, but hopefully you found that a little bit easier than breaking for an hour and coming back. But thank you all for your presentations today. And we will conclude this hearing and adjourn pending a decision. Thank you.